Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight, we're exploring a case that unfolded in the peaceful suburbs of Aurora, Colorado. A story of betrayal, deception, and a life cut tragically short. So get comfortable, and let me tell you about Angela Craig. Angela Dawn Prey was born on April 15th, 1979, in Dodge City, Kansas. She was the youngest of 10 children, the baby of a large, raucous family. By her own account, she liked to say she was the favorite child, and those who knew her would tell you she had the wit and charm to back up that claim. Angela grew up surrounded by siblings, love, and laughter. She was intelligent, energetic, and possessed what her family called an unbounded sense of humor. She had a quick wit that could light up any room. As she grew older, Angela became deeply interested in family history, interior design, and creative projects like woodworking. She read widely and approached life with curiosity and passion. On December 18th, 1999, at the age of 20, Angela married James Tolliver Craig. It was the beginning of what appeared to be a beautiful life together. Over the next 23 years, Angela and James would welcome 6 children into the world. 6 beautiful souls who would become the center of Angela's universe. The Craig family eventually settled in Aurora, Colorado, a suburb just outside Denver. James established himself as a successful dentist, opening his own practice called Summerbrook Dental. Angela worked alongside him as one of the office managers, helping to build their family business. Their lives seemed idyllic from the outside. A devoted mother, a successful dentist, 6 children, and a thriving practice. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Those who knew Angela described her as a devoted mother first and foremost. Her eldest daughter would later testify that Angela was her best friend, that they spoke nearly every day. Angela loved nothing more than being a mom, and by all accounts, she was exceptionally good at it. She was active in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, taking on various roles including choir director, teacher, and youth organization leader. Eventually, she found her calling as a family history consultant. Angela was the kind of person who showed up to weddings, funerals, graduations, baptisms, birthday celebrations. She made sure to always be where she was needed. Her brother, Mark Prey, described her as outgoing, dynamic, generous, kind, loving, and sarcastic. Her sister, Toni Kofade, called her smart, funny, confident, and in control. Angela was not a risk taker. She was not someone who would endanger herself or abandon her responsibilities. She was the one who brought things back into proper direction when life got chaotic. Angela loved animals. She'd recently gotten into using her stationary bike, staying active despite the demands of raising 6 children. She had plans for the future. Big plan. Her second eldest daughter testified that in the weeks before her death, Angela had been talking about moving, about new beginnings. But there was something Angela's family and friends didn't fully know about: the strain in her marriage. James Craig had been unfaithful to Angela for most of their 23-year marriage. It wasn't just one affair. It was a pattern of behavior that stretched across decades. Angela knew about some of these affairs. Her sister Toni testified that Angela had told her about James's infidelity, and that he had even drugged her once before, claiming it was related to a suicide attempt of his own. Despite all of this, Angela had what her obituary described as a large capacity to forgive. Time and again, she chose to stay, to try to repair the marriage, to keep the family together for the sake of their children. In December 2022, James had brought up the possibility of divorce. Text messages between the couple showed Angela was devastated, but she was willing to work on the marriage. What Angela didn't know was that James was about to meet someone new. In late February 2023, James Craig attended a dental conference in Las Vegas. It was there, while waiting for a shuttle to a conference dinner, that he struck up a conversation with Dr. Karen Kane, an orthodontist from Texas. Karen was going through a divorce herself, ending a marriage that had lasted almost 30 years. She wasn't looking for love, but she found James Craig charming. He seemed honest and vulnerable, sharing information about his children, and telling her that he too was going through a divorce. According to Karen's later testimony, they met on a Thursday evening and talked until 4 in the morning. The next day, they spent most of the day together. James told her he and Angela were no longer living together, that he had his own apartment, that the divorce was well underway. None of this was true. Over the next 3 weeks, James and Karen exchanged approximately 4,000 text messages. The messages started sweet and quickly became intense. James wrote things like, "I know I can be all right without you, but Karen, I don't want to be. And the problem is that I might be completely in love with you after 3 days, and that's nuts." He wrote to her in Spanish, "Sueña conmigo, my eternal love. May heaven let us bloom together forever." Karen was swept up in what felt like a genuine connection. She had no idea that James was lying about nearly everything. She had no idea that while he was texting her expressions of love, he was searching the internet for ways to kill someone undetected. On February 27th, 2023, the same day James created a new email account to communicate with Karen. He made several troubling internet searches from a computer in an exam room at his dental practice. At 2:34 in the afternoon, he searched, "Is there such thing as an undetectable poison?" Less than an hour later, at 3:20, he searched, "How to make poison from oleander." 1 minute after that, "Buy arsenic, Aurora, Colorado." Over the next several days, the searches continued. How many grams of pure arsenic will kill a human? Is arsenic detectable in an autopsy? Top 5 undetectable poisons that show no signs of foul play. James Craig was planning something terrible. On February 23rd, he ordered arsenic online. The package was delivered to his home on March 4th. March 6th, 2023, began like many other mornings for the Craig family. Angela and James had a routine. They would work out together, and James would make Angela a protein shake as part of their morning ritual. But that morning, something was different. At 7:31 a.m., Angela sent James a text message. It read simply, "I feel drugged." James responded, "Given our history, I know that must be triggering." Angela texted her sister Tony, telling her that her head felt weird, and her body was sluggish. She was seeing spots. Her blood sugar was high, even though she'd been exercising and hadn't eaten anything. She couldn't understand what was happening to her. The next day, March 7th, Angela told Tony she was stuffy and seeing spots, and still didn't know what was causing her symptoms. By March 9th, she texted, "I'm dizzy and tired, and my muscles don't want to work today." She'd had a protein shake and other liquids that morning, trying to help herself feel better. Angela's symptoms worsened. She began feeling dizzy, experiencing severe headaches, vomiting, and fainting. On March 9th, she was taken to an urgent care clinic, where she was examined and released. The doctors couldn't find anything definitively wrong with her. By March 10th, Angela's condition had deteriorated so much that she needed to go to the emergency room. She was admitted to the hospital for the first time. Doctors ran tests, trying to figure out what was making this otherwise healthy, active 43-year-old woman so severely ill. Angela underwent a battery of tests: blood work, imaging, consultations with specialists. No one could pinpoint the cause of her mysterious illness. After a day, she was released, still without answers. Angela was frustrated. She wanted to know what was wrong so she could get back home to her children, back to her normal life. But the illness wasn't over. 3 days later, Angela was back at the hospital. This time, she was admitted for a longer stay, 6 days in total. The medical staff continued to search for answers. Angela's symptoms included dizziness, vomiting, fainting, severe headaches, and a general feeling of being drugged. During this hospital stay, Angela told her brother Mark that she felt like she was shaking on the inside but not shaking on the outside. She was exhausted, confused, and increasingly desperate for answers. Medical records showed that at no point did Angela express suicidal thoughts or ideation. She wanted to figure out what was wrong so she could get better. There was a moment during this hospitalization when Angela's symptoms became so severe that she had to crawl across the floor to call for help because she couldn't stand up on her own. While Angela lay in a hospital bed fighting for her life, James Craig was texting Karen Kane. He sent her photos of Angela in the hospital, writing words like crashed and intubated. And Doc says she's very, very worried. He told Karen that Angela's condition had worsened so much that medical staff had to resuscitate her. And yet James Craig assured Karen that he could really use her support. He convinced her to fly to Colorado to visit him while his wife was dying in the hospital. On March 13th, while Angela was still hospitalized during her second admission, a package arrived at Summerbrook Dental, James Craig's dental office. James had told his office manager that he would be receiving a personal package and specifically instructed the staff not to open it, but someone did. When the office manager went to close the box back up, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The words potassium cyanide printed on the label. But why would a dentist need potassium cyanide? The office manager was deeply concerned. She knew Angela was in the hospital with a mysterious illness. The coincidence was too troubling to ignore. James Craig, when questioned about the package, claimed he needed the cyanide for his dental surgeries. But dental professionals would later testify that potassium cyanide has no legitimate use in modern dentistry. There was no medical reason for him to have ordered it. What made the situation even more suspicious was the way James had ordered the chemical. He'd used a personal email address, the same email address he'd created to communicate with Karen Kane. He'd ordered it to be delivered to his office, but told staff it was personal and not to open it. After 6 days, Angela was discharged from the hospital on March 14th, 2023. She still had no answers about what was making her so sick. Once home, Angela could walk on her own, but the drive from the hospital seemed to exhaust her completely. Within an hour of being home, Angela was back on her computer, searching online for possible causes of her symptoms. She was determined to figure out what was wrong with her, but she wouldn't get much time to search. The next day, March 15th, Angela's condition took a catastrophic turn. Her brother Mark, who had traveled from Utah with his wife Renee to help with the Craig children during Angela's illness, witnessed what happened next. James Craig had given Mark and Renee a prescription bottle labeled with an antibiotic called clindamycin. He told them that Angela needed to take it for a sinus infection. The bottle showed it had been prescribed by James Craig himself. What Mark and Renee didn't know was that James had allegedly emptied the antibiotic capsules and filled them with cyanide. Mark gave his sister the pills, trusting his brother-in-law completely. "We trusted Jim," Mark would later testify, his voice heavy with the weight of that betrayal. Not long after taking the medication, Angela began struggling to hold herself up. She was rushed to the University of Colorado Hospital and admitted for the final time. About 3 hours after arriving, Angela had a severe seizure and suffered an unexplained rapid medical decline. She was placed on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. Medical staff worked frantically to save her, but they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Hospital security footage would later show James Craig entering Angela's hospital room with something in his hand, a syringe. Prosecutors would argue that this was the moment James delivered the final fatal dose of poison to his dying wife. He allegedly used that syringe to inject cyanide directly into Angela's IV line while she lay helpless in the hospital bed. By this time, the nurse who had been treating Angela had been contacted by someone from Summerbrook Dental about the suspicious potassium cyanide delivery. The nurse immediately contacted the Aurora Police Department. Even as Angela lay on life support, police assigned a homicide detective to investigate her case. Angela Craig was declared brain dead on March 16th. She was placed on life support while her family gathered to say goodbye. Her 6 children came to the hospital to see their mother one final time. According to her sister-in-law, Renee Prey, Angela's final words before losing consciousness were heartbreaking in their simplicity. "Why do I hurt?" She never got an answer. On March 18th, 2023, at the age of 43, Angela Craig was taken off life support. She was pronounced dead, leaving behind 6 children who would now face the rest of their lives without their mother. The autopsy revealed the truth that the doctors had been unable to find while Angela was alive. She had been poisoned with a lethal cocktail of toxins. The Arapahoe County coroner determined that Angela died from acute cyanide and tetrahydrozoline poisoning. Tetrahydrozoline being the active ingredient found in eye drops like Visine. The autopsy also revealed subacute arsenic poisoning, meaning she had been ingesting arsenic over a period of time. Investigators tested a protein shaker bottle found at the Craig home. It tested positive for tetrahydrozoline but negative for arsenic and cyanide, suggesting James had been careful to clean up evidence between poisonings, or that the arsenic and cyanide had been administered through other means, like the prescription capsules or the syringe in the hospital. Just hours after Angela was pronounced dead, James Craig was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The 52-page arrest affidavit laid out a devastating case against him. It detailed his internet searches for undetectable poisons. It showed his orders for arsenic, cyanide, and other toxic substances. It included text messages between James and Angela, where Angela expressed her love and commitment to him even as he was systematically poisoning her. The affidavit also revealed James's relationship with Karen Kane and showed that he had been making plans for a future with her while his wife lay dying in the hospital. When confronted by police, James Craig claimed that Angela had been suicidal. He said she had made past attempts to take her own life, and that he had been helping her fulfill her wishes. He even suggested that Angela had knowingly ingested the poisons herself, but not a single person who knew Angela believed this story. Angela's family, friends, and even her own children vehemently denied that she had ever been suicidal. Angela's eldest daughter testified that her mother had big plans for the future. Her second eldest daughter said Angela's mental health had actually been better in the weeks before her death, and that they had been talking about moving and starting fresh. Angela's brother Mark stated plainly, "There's only one person in this world who would say Angela was suicidal, and that's the person who murdered her." Even after his arrest, James Craig couldn't stop trying to manipulate the situation. While awaiting trial in jail, he began plotting to cover his tracks and tamper with the case against him. According to prosecutors, James Craig attempted to persuade one of his children to plant false evidence. He asked fellow inmates to help him plant evidence and falsify testimony in his defense. Most shockingly, he offered a fellow inmate $20,000 to kill the lead detective investigating his wife's death, Detective Bobby Olson. He also offered another inmate $20,000 to find people who would falsely testify that Angela had planned to die by suicide. These actions only served to strengthen the case against him, far from being the desperate acts of an innocent man. As his defense attorneys would later argue, they appeared to be the calculated moves of someone trying to escape justice. James Craig's trial began in July 2025, more than 2 years after Angela's death. The prosecution called 48 witnesses over the course of the weeks-long trial. Dr. Karen Kane took the stand and testified about her relationship with James Craig. She was emotional as she reviewed the thousands of text messages they had exchanged. She admitted she had been foolish, that she had believed his lies about being separated and going through a divorce. When asked to identify James Craig in the courtroom, she took a long time to find him. There's a lot of pity and disgust and just disbelief, she told the media afterward. Karen testified that she never would have been with James if she had known the truth. She said their 3-week relationship did not constitute a motive for murder. There had been no planning of a future together, no discussions of a life beyond their brief romance. The trial also heard from medical professionals who had treated Angela. Doctors testified about a woman who was eagerly trying to figure out what was wrong with her so she could get back to her children and her family. They described someone who was fighting to live, not someone who wanted to die. Angela's family took the stand. Her brother Mark described giving Angela the pills that James had told him were antibiotics. Not knowing they were filled with poison, "We trusted Jim. He said he used me in that process. He killed her right under my nose." Angela's sister Toni broke down on the stand, telling the jury that Angela was her best friend and the heart of their family. When defense attorneys suggested Angela was broken, Toni clarified immediately. Broken heart, broken relationship, not broken mind. 2 of Angela's children also testified. Her eldest daughter spoke about how her mother loved nothing more than being a mom, and was really good at it. Her second eldest daughter testified that her mother had big plans for the future, and that her mental health had actually been improving in the weeks before her death. The defense maintained throughout the trial that Angela Craig had been suicidal, broken by years of James's infidelity. They argued that the investigation had been rushed and incomplete, The investigators had tunnel vision and focused only on James while ignoring other possibilities. But the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented over 1,000 hours of surveillance video showing James Craig's movements and interactions before and after his wife's poisoning. They showed the jury his internet search history, his orders for poisons, his text messages, and his emails. They presented toxicology results, confirming lethal levels of cyanide and tetrahydrozoline in Angela's system, along with evidence of arsenic poisoning. They also revealed a 4-page note from James Craig's phone, written after Angela's hospitalization, which appeared to be a staged attempt to create a false suicide narrative. On July 30th, 2025, after more than 8 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of 2 counts of solicitation to commit tampering with physical evidence. Guilty of 2 counts of solicitation to commit perjury in the first degree. Guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The jury acquitted him of only 1 charge, a lesser-included charge of manslaughter caused or aided suicide. By finding him guilty of murder, they were explicitly rejecting his claim that Angela had taken her own life, or that he had merely assisted her in dying. Under Colorado law, a conviction for first-degree murder carries an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that same day, Judge Shea Whitaker held the sentencing hearing. Before imposing the sentence, the judge allowed Angela's family and friends to speak. 2 of Angela's children gave emotional impact statements. Her daughter, Miriam Maservi, addressed her father directly. "I'm supposed to be able to trust my dad. He was supposed to be my hero, and instead he will forever be the villain in my life." Sir Craig's oldest child and son, Tolliver Craig, spoke through tears. "It's hard to lose your mom, and then a few days after that, lose your dad." Multiple siblings spoke about Angela's light, her humor, her dedication to her family. They described the devastation James had caused, not just to Angela, but to their entire family, to his own family, to the 6 children who now had to grapple with the reality that their father had murdered their mother. Judge Whitaker listened to all of the impact statements before addressing James Craig directly. The judge compared him to a natural disaster. Dr. Craig unleashed a path of destruction as wide as a tornado and just as devastating. Damage to his children, damage to Angela's family, damage to his own family. None of the individuals that are here in the courtroom before the court today will ever be the same. Throughout the proceedings, James Craig showed little emotion. He wept only twice during the sentencing, once during general statements and once when his son spoke. Neither Craig nor his attorneys spoke before the judge imposed the sentence. James Craig was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder. The judge also gave him the maximum sentence on each of the other charges, totaling an additional 33 years in prison. District Attorney Amy Padden spoke to the media after the sentencing. She described the case as one of calculated cruelty. Angela suffered many days of unexplained illness while the defendant knowingly administered poison, all while portraying himself as a concerned husband. This was a premeditated and callous crime driven by greed, deception, and betrayal. Deputy District Attorney Osama Maghrebi added, "Angela was a devoted mother and a woman of kindness, strength, and grace. She trusted the man she married. She believed in their future together, and yet, while she cared for their children and worked to hold her family together, her husband was indiscriminately plotting her death." For Karen Kane, the aftermath was also difficult. She had to face public scrutiny and blame, even though she had been deceived just as thoroughly as Angela had been. She received hate mail. Her dental practice suffered. She described feeling a special kind of feeling alone as she weathered the storm of judgment and betrayal. When you're being run through the gauntlet and getting steamrolled by the world, that doesn't feel just like being alone, she said. That feels lonely and just unsupported. She testified that she now approaches relationships much more cautiously, though she's tried hard not to become cynical. The experience had changed her forever. Angela's family asked that she be remembered, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, loving person she was. Angela Craig was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and above all, a mother. She was intelligent, energetic, funny, kind, and forgiving. She had a quick wit and an unbounded sense of humor. She loved woodworking, interior design, and family history. She was deeply involved in her church community. She showed up for people always. Her son said that his mom loved a lot of things, but she didn't have time for them all. She had 6 children instead, he said. Those 6 children, whose names have been kept private to protect them, now face the rest of their lives without their mother. They've lost both parents. One to murder, one to prison. They carry the unbearable knowledge that their father is responsible for their mother's death. At Angela's funeral, family and friends gathered to celebrate her life. Her obituary captured her spirit. Angela made every moment with her unforgettable. Besides her unbounded sense of humor and quick wit, Angela was intelligent and energetic, and used her gifts to elevate those around her, especially her children. She had a large capacity to forgive, was willing to help both friends and strangers, and she was fiercely dedicated to her family. After her children, the obituary noted, Angela's faith in Jesus Christ was her most important treasure. Angela's most endearing trait, her family said, was showing up to everything. And even in death, that's what she's still doing. She's showing up in the memories of those who loved her, in the strength her children carry forward, in the fight for justice that her siblings waged on her behalf. The case of Angela Craig is a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades. James Craig was a successful dentist, a father of 6, an active member of his church community. To the outside world, he appeared to be living the American dream. But behind closed doors, he was a man consumed by selfishness and deceit. He poisoned the woman who had stood by him through decades of infidelity. He poisoned the mother of his children. He did it slowly, methodically, watching her suffer as doctors scrambled to find answers. And when she was at her most vulnerable, lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life, he delivered the final blow. Angela Craig's final words were, "Why do I hurt?" She deserved an answer. She deserved the truth. She deserved to live. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about trust, about the evil that can lurk within those we love most, about the importance of paying attention to our instincts when something doesn't feel right. The lead detective, the medical professionals who fought to save Angela, the family members who sought justice, and the jury who saw through James Craig's lies. They all ensured that Angela's death would not go unanswered. James Craig will spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no possibility of parole. He will never again be able to harm anyone. He will never again be able to manipulate, deceive, or poison. And Angela Craig, though her life was cut tragically short, will be remembered not as a victim, but as a devoted mother, a loving sister, a faithful friend, and a woman who, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal, never stopped fighting to get back to the people she loved most. Her 6 children. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight's story is one of heartbreak and secrets, of a young life that vanished into the California mountains, leaving behind only questions and a family forever changed. This is the story of Aranda Briones, a 16-year-old girl from Moreno Valley, California, who disappeared on a winter afternoon in 2019. It's a story that begins with friendship, traces through betrayal, and ends in a darkness that still haunts the San Bernardino Mountains today. So let me take you back to that January day when everything changed. This is a story told slowly, carefully, with respect for those who loved Aranda and continue to search for answers. In the sprawling suburbs of Moreno Valley, about an hour east of Los Angeles, lived a 16-year-old girl named Aranda Isabel Briones. She had brown hair that caught the California sun, hazel green eyes that shifted in the light, and a small distinctive mark on her chin that made her smile uniquely hers. She wore her nose pierced in the septum, a small act of teenage independence. Aranda's life had not been an easy one. Her parents were largely absent from her world, and so from the age of 3 she had been raised by her grandfather, Carl Horscott, in his home on Via Vargas Drive. Carl and his wife Jeannie had opened their hearts to this little girl, giving her the stability her young life needed. They had been married for 44 years when Jeannie passed away, unexpectedly just 2 years before Aranda's disappearance. The loss devastated the family, leaving Carl to navigate his grief while raising a teenage granddaughter alone. Despite the challenges in her life, Aranda was described by those who knew her as full of life. Someone who cared deeply about everyone around her. She worked at the Moreno Valley Mall, where she was about to be promoted to a leadership role, a testament to her dedication and the trust others placed in her. Her uncle Matthew would later say there was a hole in his heart from her absence. She was constantly in touch with her friends, always on social media, always connected. This was a generation that documented everything, that shared their lives in snapshots and status updates. Aranda had multiple Instagram accounts, one dedicated to makeup that showcased her creative side. She and her friends were in contact constantly, their phones a lifeline to each other's worlds. But like many teenagers navigating the complicated social landscape of high school, Aranda sometimes found herself drawn to friendships that concerned her family. Her uncle Matthew would later admit, with the painful honesty that comes after tragedy, that she didn't always make the best choice in friends. But then again, he would say everybody makes mistakes. Everyone does. To understand what happened to Aranda, we must go back to a November morning in 2017, more than a year before she vanished. It was the 7th of November, and Aranda was a student at Moreno Valley High School, running with a group of friends that included an 18-year-old boy named Owen Schaver. That morning, instead of going to class, Aranda and several friends decided to skip school and hang out at Community Park. It was the kind of small rebellion that teenagers have engaged in forever, seeking freedom in a stolen morning, away from the structure of school. Among them was Owen, and he had brought something dangerous to their gathering, a small caliber handgun tucked into his waist. The morning might have passed unremarkably, just another day of truancy, except that a sheriff's school resource officer happened to be looking for students who were skipping class. When the officer spotted the group in the park and began approaching them, someone shouted a warning. Police. The teenagers scattered in different directions, fear overriding any sense they might have had. Owen, suddenly aware of the weapon he was carrying, made a split-second decision. He tossed the gun to Aranda and yelled for her to hide it. Aranda, frightened and not knowing what else to do, threw the handgun into a nearby drainage canal. But the officer had seen her. He detained her, and later when school administrators questioned her, Aranda told them the truth. The gun hadn't been hers. Owen Schaver had given it to her. She had simply panicked and tried to get rid of it. The consequences came down in February of 2018, when the local school board met to decide the fate of both students. In what must have felt like a terrible irony to Aranda, she and Owen were both expelled from Moreno Valley High School. She had tried to help him, had acted on instinct when he threw her his weapon, and now she was paying the same price he was. Aranda enrolled in a nearby continuation school, staying close to her grandfather and the life she knew in Moreno Valley. Owen, however, moved away. He relocated to his father's home in Hesperia, about 50 miles north in San Bernardino County, and enrolled in a continuation school there. For a time they lost touch. Aranda didn't talk about Owen anymore. Her life moved on without him. But Owen had not moved on. According to prosecutors who would later piece together his state of mind, he was incensed about his expulsion, and in his anger, he came to see Aranda's honesty as a betrayal. She had told the truth about whose gun it was, and in his mind that made her responsible for his punishment, for the disruption of his life, for everything that followed. For over a year, this resentment festered, and during that time from November of 2018 through January of 2019, Owen began having conversations on Snapchat, on Facebook, on various social media platforms. He was trying to purchase a firearm. Eventually, he succeeded in obtaining one. On the 12th of January, 2019, Aranda received a text message from Owen Schaver. They hadn't spoken in over a year, hadn't hung out since before their expulsion. But now, out of the blue, Owen was reaching out with an invitation. He told Aranda he was going to spend the next day making drug deliveries and robbing drug dealers. He invited her to come along, painting a picture of danger and excitement, the kind of rebellious adventure that might appeal to a 16-year-old girl looking for something beyond the ordinary routine of her life. For reasons we can never fully understand, Aranda agreed. Perhaps the friendship seemed repaired. Perhaps the promise of excitement was too tempting. Perhaps she never believed he was serious about the crimes he described. Whatever her reasoning, she told him yes. They made plans to meet at Bayside Park the following afternoon at 5 o'clock. January 13th, 2019 was a Sunday. Aranda left her grandfather's house that day, telling her family she was going to spend time with a male friend from school. It was not unusual for her to go out with friends. There was no reason for Carl to worry more than any grandfather worries when a teenage granddaughter leaves the house. At 5 o'clock as planned, Aranda arrived at Bayside Park. Two of her friends were with her and watched as she got into Owen Schaver's Nissan Versa. The friends would later tell investigators what they saw. They watched Aranda climb into the car, watched it drive away heading north toward Box Springs Mountain, and for the first hour everything seemed normal. Aranda was active on social media, posting pictures to her accounts. The photos showed her and Owen together in his car, and her captions radiated happiness. She was with her homie, she wrote. He was even letting her do some of the driving. The snapshots captured a girl who seemed genuinely elated, reunited with an old friend, caught up in the moment. Her friends who saw these posts thought nothing of it. It looked like Aranda was having a good time. But then, sometime shortly before 6 o'clock in the evening, Aranda went silent. The stream of posts stopped. She stopped responding to messages from her friends. Her Snapchat location, which had been actively tracking her movements, suddenly turned off. When one friend noticed that Aranda's location showed her in an unexpected area and messaged to ask why she was there, the location feature was immediately disabled. Her phone, which had been her constant companion, her link to the world, simply went dark. While Aranda's digital presence vanished, Owen Schaver's phone remained active, and investigators would later track its movements through cell tower pings. Around 6 o'clock, Owen's vehicle began heading towards San Bernardino County, traveling north from where he had picked up Aranda, and then he sent a message to his older brother, Gary Anthony Schaver, who was 21 years old at the time. The message was chilling in its casual preparation. Be ready for tonight. Get shovels and lighter fluid ready. Owen drove to a mobile home park in San Bernardino County and picked up his brother Gary. Then with both brothers in the car, they began driving higher into the San Bernardino Mountains, taking state routes 138 and 18, roads that wind through increasingly remote terrain. At approximately 8:30 that evening, Owen Schaver turned off his cell phone. For the next hour and 45 minutes, his phone remained off, leaving no digital trail, no cell tower pings to track their movements. This was the dark space in the timeline, the gap where something terrible happened in those mountains. Whatever occurred during those missing hours, only the Schaver brothers truly know, but investigators would later discover evidence that painted a grim picture. When Owen's phone finally turned back on at 10:15 p.m., he was back at his father's house on Grevillea Street in Hesperia. Aranda was not with him. The next morning, when Aranda had not come home and had not contacted anyone, her family knew something was wrong. This was not like her. She was always in touch, always connected to her friends and family. The silence was deafening. Her brother Daniel and her uncle Matthew contacted the Moreno Valley Police Department to report her missing. The family told police that Aranda had been dropped off at Moreno Valley Community Park, near Frederick and Cottonwood, around 6 or 6:30 p.m., based on what they had been told. They mentioned that a friend named Owen had claimed to be the last person to see her, said he had dropped her off at the park and seen her get into a gray four-door sedan. But when investigators pulled footage from surveillance cameras at the park, something didn't match up. Aranda was not seen on any of the cameras around the time. Owen claimed to have dropped her off. In fact, there was no indication she had ever been at the park that evening, and the gray four-door sedan Owen described was also nowhere to be seen on the footage. The family didn't recognize anyone who owned a car matching that description. Daniel would tell reporters that when they reviewed the footage, it looked like nobody had been dropped off between 6 and 6:30 at all. According to Aranda's brother, the Snapchat map feature had actually placed her phone at a completely different location that evening. not at the park where Owen said he had left her. The investigation moved quickly. The Moreno Valley police began working the case immediately. And within days, the FBI had joined the search. Human trafficking investigators were brought in, considering every possible explanation for a missing teenage girl. The family organized search parties. They printed flyers with Aranda's picture and description. 5'4", 110 pounds, brown hair, hazel green eyes, nose piercing, a unique mark on her chin. Last seen wearing a white and blue jacket, dark jeans, and a dark shirt. About 200 people gathered at Moreno Valley Community Park for a vigil. They held candles and prayed and remembered a girl who was full of life. Carl Horsecut, Aranda's grandfather, told reporters it had been a living hell. Despite everything, he said he still held on to a glimmer of hope that he would see his granddaughter again. Aranda's father, Chapo Lee, who had been out of her life until just a few months before her disappearance, spoke through tears about having just reconnected with his daughter. He had not seen her since she was 4 years old. Their reunion in November had been the happiest moment of his life. And now she was gone. She's alive to me, he said. She's always going to be alive until I find her. The family pleaded with anyone who might know something to come forward. Matthew Horscott made an emotional appeal to other teenagers who might be covering for a friend, or might be scared to speak up. The only person you're hurting right now is Aranda, he said. The investigation led detectives back to the person who had last been with Aranda, Owen Schaver. As they dug deeper into his story, the inconsistencies mounted. The timeline didn't work. The surveillance footage contradicted his account, and investigators discovered his online conversations about attempting to purchase a firearm in the months leading up to Aranda's disappearance. Then came the forensic evidence. Investigators searched Owen's Nissan Versa and sprayed luminol in the trunk, a chemical that reveals the presence of blood even after attempts to clean it. The luminol showed something alarming, evidence of a significant amount of blood that had pooled toward the bottom of the trunk. Underneath the carpeting, DNA was extracted from the vehicle and analyzed. It matched Aranda Briani's. Investigators also searched the home where Owen and Gary lived with their father in Hesperia. According to neighbors who witnessed the search, authorities dug in the backyard and retrieved items including blankets and articles of clothing. The evidence pointed toward a meticulously planned murder, not a random disappearance. On February 11th, 2019, less than a month after Aranda vanished, police arrested both Schaver brothers at their home on Grevelia Street in Hesperia in the early morning hours. Owen Skylar Schaver, then 18 years old, was arrested on suspicion of murder. His older brother Gary Anthony Schaver, then 21, was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. At a press conference, Riverside County Sheriff's Lieutenant Chris Durham announced that investigators had received evidence that led them to believe Aranda was the victim of a homicide. While the brothers were in custody, the search for Aranda continued. Volunteers and law enforcement personnel combed through the San Bernardino Mountains where they believed her remains might have been disposed of, but no trace of her has ever been found. Both brothers pleaded not guilty to the charges. And then, for years, the case seemed to stall. The coronavirus pandemic in 2020 slowed everything down, and even after the world began functioning more normally, delays continued to plague the case. Aranda's family waited. They held on to hope while living with uncertainty, not knowing where their daughter, their granddaughter, their sister, their niece had been taken. In 2022, there was a preliminary hearing that brought some movement to the case. A judge dismissed the first-degree murder charges against Gary Schaver. Instead, he would face charges as an accessory after the fact, suggesting he had helped cover up the crime rather than participating in the murder itself. Then in March of 2024, more than 5 years after Aranda's disappearance, Gary Schaver accepted a plea deal with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. He pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 1 year in jail, followed by 12 months of probation, and was required to pay victim restitution. Owen Schaver maintained his not guilty plea and chose to go to trial. In August of 2024, Owen's trial finally began in Riverside County Superior Court. The case was considered important enough that District Attorney Mike Hestron personally prosecuted it, something he rarely did. He would later tell reporters it was good for an elected district attorney to try a case occasionally, to stay connected to the work being done in the courts, and to be reminded of how difficult that work truly is. The prosecution's case was built on the timeline. The forensic evidence, the digital trail, and the motive that had been simmering for over a year. They argued that Owen had lured Aranda into his car with promises of adventure, that he had planned her murder carefully, that he had enlisted his brother's help to cover up the crime. They presented evidence of the blood found in his vehicle, the messages about shovels and lighter fluid, the phone data showing the journey into the mountains during those crucial hours when Aranda's phone went silent and Owen's phone went dark. The trial lasted 6 days. Riverside County Superior Court Judge Timothy Hollenhorst presided over the proceedings. Aranda's family sat in the courtroom, watching as the details of her final hours were reconstructed, as the evidence of her murder was laid out piece by piece. The jury deliberated for just over a day. When they returned to the courtroom, they had reached their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, with a special circumstance finding of lying in wait. This meant that Owen had concealed his intentions, had waited for the right moment to strike, had planned Aranda's death in advance. On October 25, 2024, nearly 6 years after Aranda vanished, Owen Skylar Schaver stood before Judge Hollenhorst for sentencing. Several of Aranda's loved ones gave victim impact statements, describing the devastation her disappearance had brought to their lives. One friend described Aranda as a kind spirit who was always joyful, even in bad moments. Then Judge Hollenhorst addressed Owen directly, and his words were stark and uncompromising. "There are many questions left unanswered," the judge said. "None more than where is Aranda?" He looked at the young man before him and continued, "Mr. Schaver, from what I can tell about you, it appears that you are not capable of feeling remorse, so I do not intend to lecture you on how devastating your actions were in this case. However, there is no question in this court's mind that you are the face of pure evil." Judge Hollenhorst then imposed the sentence required by law for first-degree murder, with special circumstances, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Owen Schaver, who had just turned 23 years old, would spend the rest of his life behind bars. District Attorney Hestron spoke to the press after the sentencing. "The victim didn't deserve this," he said. "She was just a kid. She had her whole life ahead of her. This was a tremendous loss, all because of one person's choice. It's truly heartbreaking." He also revealed a disturbing detail that spoke to Owen's lack of remorse. On the day of his conviction, Owen had spoken to his grandfather from jail, wondering aloud whether he should get a trophy for being a convicted murderer. It was a comment that seemed to confirm the judge's assessment that Owen was incapable of feeling genuine remorse for what he had done. Today, Aranda's body has still not been found. Somewhere in the San Bernardino Mountains, in terrain that is vast and unforgiving, in landscapes that can swallow secrets and hold them for decades, Aranda remains. Search parties have combed through the areas where investigators believe she might have been left, but the mountains are too large. The possible locations too numerous. Carl Horscott, who raised Aranda from the age of 3, who lost his wife and then his granddaughter within 2 years, still hopes to one day give Aranda a proper burial. The family still prays for that closure, for the ability to lay her to rest with dignity, to have a place they can visit and remember her. The case raises uncomfortable questions about teenage friendship, about the masks people wear, about the way resentment can metastasize into something monstrous. Aranda had trusted Owen enough to get into his car that January afternoon. She had posted pictures expressing happiness to be with her old friend. She had no way of knowing that the smiling homie beside her had spent over a year plotting his revenge for what he perceived as her betrayal. For the simple act of telling the truth when questioned by school administrators about a gun she never should have been given. For refusing to lie to protect someone else at the expense of her own integrity. Aranda paid with her life. Her story is preserved now in court records and news articles, in the memories of those who loved her, in the social media posts that captured her final happy moments. She remains frozen at 16 years old, forever young, her potential forever unrealized. The white and blue jacket she wore that day, the dark jeans, the nose piercing that was part of her identity, the distinctive mark on her chin, all of these details were shared thousands of times on missing person posters. But she was never found. The gray sedan Owen described was a fiction. The story about dropping her off at the park was a lie. The truth was darker and more permanent than anyone wanted to believe in those early days of searching. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll think about Aranda Isabel Briones. About a girl who was full of life and who cared about everyone. About a teenager who was about to get a promotion at work. Who loved makeup and social media and staying connected with her friends. About a granddaughter who was loved fiercely by a grandfather who never stopped hoping to see her again. Her family still remembers her laughter. They remember a girl who brought light into their lives. They remember her for who she was. Not just for how she was lost. The San Bernardino Mountains keep their secret still, but Aranda's memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and her story serves as a reminder that evil can wear a familiar face, that betrayal can come from unexpected places, and that some losses leave holes that can never quite be filled. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Tonight we explore a story that speaks to the fragility of life and the quiet moments before everything changes. This is a case from Orlando, Florida, a place known for its magic and wonder, but where, in the spring of 2018, a young woman's dreams were tragically cut short. Let's walk through this story together, slowly and carefully, honoring the life of 23-year-old Vanessa Coakley. Orlando, Florida. A city of theme parks and perpetual sunshine where tourists flock and dreams are manufactured daily. But for those who live there, it's simply home. In the Taft neighborhood, on East Cypress Street, lived the Coakley family. They were close-knit, the kind of family that gathered for Sunday dinners, celebrated holidays together, and supported one another through life's challenges. Vanessa Jessica Coakley was their eldest daughter. At 23 years old, she embodied everything her parents had hoped for. She had a smile that could light up a room. Her instructors at Southern Technical College would later say she was the kind of student who never missed class, who showed up early, who stayed late to help others understand difficult concepts. Vanessa had recently made the president's list at Southern Technical College. It was a prestigious honor reserved for students who maintained exceptional grades while managing rigorous coursework. She was studying to become a medical assistant, drawn to the idea of helping people, of making a difference in their lives during vulnerable moments. Her professors spoke of her energy, her dedication, the way she approached every assignment with genuine enthusiasm. But Vanessa wasn't just focused on her studies. She had recently landed a job at Disney. Not just any job, but one she was genuinely excited about. For someone living in Orlando, working for Disney meant something special. It meant being part of something larger than yourself, bringing joy to families from around the world. Her family noticed how she talked about this new opportunity, the pride in her voice, the plans she was already making. Her neighbors in the Taft neighborhood knew her well. They would see her often, coming and going from the family home, always friendly, always quick with a wave or a greeting. During the holidays, the Coakley family was known for their elaborate Christmas light displays. They were that family on the block, the ones who brought joy to the neighborhood, who opened their home for gatherings. Vanessa's life seemed to be unfolding exactly as it should. She had her education on track, a new job she loved, a family that adored her, and friends from school and work who valued her presence. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect trajectory, there was a complication. A relationship that had ended, but hadn't quite released its grip. A man who couldn't accept that their time together was over. His name was Christian Ruben Valentin Penci. Christian Valentin Penci was 32 years old, 9 years older than Vanessa. They had dated for about 2 years. Their relationship characterized by its instability. It was what people call an on-again, off-again relationship. The kind where the same problems resurface repeatedly, where breakups happen and reconciliations follow, only to cycle back to conflict. They had broken up in 2017. Vanessa had her reasons. According to court documents, she suspected Christian of being unfaithful. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, and Vanessa had decided she was done trying. She was young, with her whole life ahead of her. She was building something for herself, and she didn't need the drama and heartache that the relationship brought. But Christian couldn't let go. Even after the breakup, he tried to rekindle what they'd had. He wanted her back. Her family would later tell investigators that Christian was actively trying to resume the relationship. But Vanessa had made her position clear. She wasn't interested. She had moved on, at least in her mind and heart. She was focused on her future, on her studies, on her new job. Christian, meanwhile, was struggling. His brother would later tell police that Christian had been dealing with depression. He was going through a difficult custody battle with his ex-wife over their children. It was the kind of situation that drains you emotionally and financially, that makes you feel like you're losing control of your life. And then in late March of 2018, Christian lost his job. He had been working as a van driver for a company called Omicron Granite on John Young Parkway. According to court documents, he was fired for multiple reasons: poor performance, failing to show up for work, and suspected theft. Investigators would later discover he had been stealing floor polishers from the company and pawning them. It was a desperate act, the kind born of financial pressure and poor judgment. So here was Christian Valentin Penchi in late March 2018. Jobless, depressed, fighting with his ex-wife over custody, and rejected by the woman he still wanted to be with. It was a perfect storm of personal crisis. And when people are in crisis, when they feel like everything is slipping away, they sometimes make choices that are unthinkable in calmer moments. Christian lived at the Sand Lake Courtyard condominiums, also known as the Heritage Hotel. It was a former motel converted into apartments, located at 7900 South Orange Blossom Trail. His unit was number 1101. It was here, in this modest apartment, that the tragedy would unfold. Saturday, March 31st, 2018. It was Easter weekend, a time of celebration and renewal. The Coakley family had plans for their Easter dinner the next day. It would be a typical gathering for them, full of food and laughter and togetherness. Vanessa was looking forward to it. That evening, around 8 o'clock, Vanessa told her parents she was going out for a bit. She said she'd be back in a few hours. She left the house wearing a red and white striped dress, carrying a black and brown bag. But there was something telling about what she didn't take with her: her uniform for the Disney training session scheduled for the next day. This detail would later strike investigators as significant. If Vanessa had planned to stay out overnight, surely she would have taken the uniform she needed for her first day of training. No, she had every intention of coming back home that night. Her parents watched her leave. It was just another Saturday evening. Nothing unusual, nothing that would have raised alarm. How could they know it would be the last time they'd see their daughter alive? Vanessa went to Christian's apartment. We don't know exactly what brought her there. Perhaps he had contacted her asking to talk. Perhaps there were belongings she needed to retrieve. Perhaps she thought she could make things clear to him one final time, that their relationship was truly over. Whatever the reason, she went to apartment 1101 at the Sand Lake Courtyard condominiums. Between 9 and 10 o'clock that evening, Vanessa's family tried calling her. The phone rang, but she didn't answer. They tried again. Still nothing. This wasn't like her, but it was still early. Maybe she was driving, or her phone was on silent. They'd hear from her soon, they thought, at some point before midnight. According to phone records, Vanessa's phone stopped broadcasting its location. The phone that she lived on, as her family would later describe it to detectives, went dark. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, but Vanessa hadn't vanished. She was still in apartment 1101, and something terrible had happened there. According to Christian's later confession and court documents, there was an argument that night. The details of what sparked it may never be fully known, but what is known is that the argument took place in Christian's bathroom, and at some point during that confrontation, Christian retrieved a .380 caliber handgun. The weapon discharged. Vanessa suffered a gunshot wound to her head. The young woman who had been so full of life and promise, who had smiled at her professors just days before, who had been excited about her new job at Disney, was gone. In an instant, in that cramped bathroom, her future was erased. Christian would later claim, during his sentencing, that he didn't intend to harm her. He would say he was under the influence of drugs that night, that it wasn't me who committed this act, but intent or not, Vanessa Coakley lay dead in his bathroom, and Christian now faced a choice about what to do next. Christian Valentin Penci did not call for help. He did not call 911. He did not alert Vanessa's family. Instead, he left her body in his bathroom and began making other plans. Sunday, April 1st, arrived. Easter Sunday. The Coakley family had their dinner planned. But Vanessa never came home. She missed the Easter celebration, something completely out of character for her. She was supposed to start her training at Disney that morning, but she never showed up. The uniform still sat at her parents' house, unworn. Her family was worried, but not yet panicked. They tried to track her phone using her Google Services account. The technology that we carry with us everywhere, the devices that know where we are at all times, can be a blessing in moments like this. The phone's last known location appeared on their screen, 7900 South Orange Blossom Trail. Christian's address. At first, this information was almost reassuring. They knew Vanessa and Christian had dated. Even though they'd broken up, maybe she'd gone to see him. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she'd stayed over and hadn't realized how late it had got. These thoughts went through their minds, the kind of hopeful explanations families grasp at when someone they love doesn't come home. But Monday came, and still no word from Vanessa. Her phone remained off. She didn't show up for class at Southern Technical College. The family's worry deepened into genuine fear. Meanwhile, Christian was in motion. On Monday, April 2nd, just hours before Vanessa's mother would officially report her missing to authorities, Christian went to Cash America Pawn on Orange Blossom Trail. He had a .380 caliber handgun to sell. The clerk took down the information, completed the transaction, and Christian walked out with cash in his pocket. It was the same caliber weapon that had killed Vanessa. That afternoon, at approximately 5:20 in the evening, Vanessa's mother called the Orange County Sheriff's Office to report her daughter missing. She told them about tracking Vanessa's phone to Christian's address. She told them about the missed Easter dinner, the missed training, the missed classes. Everything about this situation was wrong. Vanessa was not the kind of person to disappear without word. The wheels of the investigation began to turn, but Christian was already implementing the next phase of his plan. On Tuesday, April 3rd, Christian went to the airport and boarded a JetBlue flight to San Juan, Puerto Rico. He had purchased the ticket the day before, right around the time Vanessa's mother was reporting her missing. He told no one about this trip, not his family, not his friends, not his brother. He simply got on a plane and left the country, leaving Vanessa's body behind in his locked apartment. Wednesday, April 4th. 36 hours after Christian had boarded his flight to Puerto Rico, Vanessa's family found her car. It was parked at a Panda Express restaurant near Southern Technical College, not far from Christian's apartment. Her black Nissan Versa sat there in the parking lot, abandoned. The family notified the Orange County Sheriff's Office immediately. Deputies arrived to process the vehicle. What they found painted a clearer picture of Vanessa's intentions that night. In the back seat was her backpack, filled with her school books. She had been planning to study in the trunk. They found her purse and her credit cards. Everything she would need for her daily life was still in that car. She hadn't run away, she hadn't left of her own accord. Something had prevented her from ever reaching that vehicle. That same day, Christian's brother called the police. He wanted to report Christian missing. He told investigators he hadn't heard from his brother in days, and was worried. Christian had been depressed, he explained. The custody battle was wearing him down. He'd lost his job. The brother feared something might have happened to Christian. And investigators now had multiple missing persons reports, but they were starting to understand these cases were connected. A woman missing, her ex-boyfriend also missing, her phone last pinged at his address, her car found near his home, and no one had heard from either of them in days. On Thursday, April 5th, the pieces fell into place for investigators. They learned that Christian had boarded a flight to Puerto Rico. He hadn't told anyone. He had simply fled the country right after Vanessa was reported missing. The same day he pawned that handgun, the timeline was becoming clearer and more damning. Late that evening, the judge signed a search warrant for Christian's apartment. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office prepared to enter Unit 1101 at the Sand Lake Courtyard condominiums. Early on Friday morning, April 6th, they executed the warrant. They entered the apartment and began their search. In the bathroom, they made the discovery they had feared but expected. Vanessa Cuckley's body, she had been there for 6 days. The young woman who should have been attending classes, working at her new job, having dinner with her family, lay lifeless in that small bathroom. The investigation was now a homicide case. The medical examiner would confirm the cause of death. A gunshot wound to the head. The scene was processed. Evidence collected. Photographs taken. Every detail documented. And somewhere in Puerto Rico, Christian Valentin Penci was either unaware that his apartment had been searched, or knew it was only a matter of time before he was found. The Orange County Sheriff's Office issued a warrant for Christian's arrest. First-degree murder. They coordinated with authorities in Puerto Rico. Christian's photograph was distributed. Be on the lookout for this man, 32 years old. Wanted for murder. On Saturday, April 7th, Puerto Rican authorities located Christian. He was arrested without incident and taken into custody on the murder warrant. He was also charged with grand theft in an unrelated case. The stolen floor polishers from his former workplace catching up with him. The extradition process began. Christian was transported back to Orlando, back to Orange County, where he would face justice for what he had done. On Thursday night, April 12th, he was booked into the Orange County Jail. His mugshot was taken, his fingerprints recorded, his belongings cataloged. He was placed in a cell to await trial. The evidence against him was substantial. Vanessa's body found in his apartment. His flight from the country immediately after her disappearance. The pawned gun. The timeline that showed him buying a plane ticket and selling a weapon while Vanessa's family searched desperately for her. No jury would have difficulty connecting these dots. Perhaps Christian knew this. Perhaps his attorney counseled him on the strength of the prosecution's case. Or perhaps after months in custody, the weight of what he had done became too much to deny. On Tuesday, January 29th, 2019, nearly 10 months after Vanessa's murder, Christian Valentin Penci stood before a judge. He was now 33 years old. Assistant State Attorney Will J. addressed the court, outlining the evidence, the confession, the plea agreement. Christian Valentin Penci pleaded guilty, not to first-degree murder, but to second-degree murder. It's a legal distinction that matters greatly in terms of sentencing. First-degree murder requires premeditation, planning, intent. Second-degree murder acknowledges that the killing was intentional, but perhaps not planned in advance. It was a compromise, the kind that happens in courtrooms every day. The prosecution gets a guaranteed conviction without the time and expense of a trial. The defendant avoids the harshest possible sentence. Christian admitted to killing Vanessa. He confessed that they had argued in his bathroom. He confessed to shooting her. The details of that confession remain sealed in court documents, the specifics known only to the attorneys, the judge, and Christian himself. His sentencing was scheduled for Friday, April 12th, 2019, exactly 1 year and 6 days after Vanessa's body had been discovered. 1 year and 12 days after she had died. The courtroom was full on that Friday in April. Vanessa's family was there, of course. They had waited a year for this moment. A year of grief, of anger, of emptiness where Vanessa should have been. Her mother prepared a statement. How do you put into words what it means to lose a child to violence? How do you make someone understand the magnitude of that loss? Christian was led into the courtroom. The judge presided. The formal proceedings of sentencing began. Before the sentence was handed down, Vanessa's mother stood to address the court and the man who had killed her daughter. As Vanessa's mother, she said, "You will never understand what you have done by taking my firstborn." The words hung in the air. Firstborn. All the hopes and dreams that parents invest in their children, multiplied in that first child. The person who made you a parent, who changed everything about your life, who you watched grow from infant to toddler to child to young woman, gone, murdered by someone she had once cared for. Then Christian was given the opportunity to speak. Some defendants remained silent. Some maintained their innocence even after pleading guilty. Christian chose to speak. "I want to say to the victim's family, I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry," he said. His voice, recorded in court transcripts, continued. "It wasn't me. It was something out of the ordinary. I was under the influence of drugs and that wasn't me. That night, and I'm deeply sorry." It was an apology wrapped in excuses. The drugs made me do it. It wasn't really me. A claim of diminished responsibility, even in the moment when he was supposed to take full responsibility. Some in the courtroom may have found it sincere, others likely heard it as hollow, a last-ditch attempt to garner sympathy. The judge had heard the statements. The judge had reviewed the evidence, the confession, the plea agreement. The judge had a decision to make. In Florida, second-degree murder carries a potential sentence of up to life in prison, but it's not mandatory. The judge could have chosen a lesser sentence, 15 years, 25 years, 40 years. The judge chose life. Christian Valentin Penci was sentenced to life in prison. No parole. He would die behind bars in a Florida state prison, far from the life he had once known. He was 33 years old at sentencing. If he lives to be 80, that's 47 years of incarceration. If he lives longer, more years still. Every morning waking up in a cell, every night falling asleep to the sounds of prison. The same routine, day after day, year after year, for the rest of his natural life. It was justice, in the eyes of the law. But for Vanessa's family, no sentence could bring her back. No amount of time served could restore what had been taken from them. Today, Christian Valentin Penci remains in a Florida state prison. He is a number in the system, one among thousands of inmates serving out their sentences. His name appears in databases of Florida prisoners. His case file sits in archives. Occasionally, true crime researchers like us come across his story, and through it, learn about Vanessa. But Vanessa Coakley should not be remembered solely as a victim. That's not who she was. That was only her final moments, not her entire existence. Vanessa was a student who made the president's list. She was a young woman excited about her first day at Disney. She was a daughter who came home for Easter dinner. She was a neighbor who helped put up Christmas lights. She was a friend who showed up early to class and stayed late to help others. She had dreams of becoming a medical assistant, of helping people, of building a career and a life. Her instructors at Southern Technical College spoke of her smile, her energy, her dedication. Her neighbors remembered her as sweet, part of a big happy family. Her family knew her as someone who never vanished without a word, someone reliable, someone loving. That's who Vanessa Coakley was. She was 23 years old. Her whole life stretched before her, the career she would build, the places she would travel, the people she would meet, the experiences she would have, perhaps a family of her own someday, children, grandchildren, decades of memories and moments and milestones. All of it erased in a moment of violence. The question that haunts cases like this is always, why? Why did this have to happen? What if Christian had simply accepted that the relationship was over? What if he had let her go? What if he had sought help for his depression, his anger, his sense of loss? What if? But those questions have no answers that satisfy. The reality is that Christian made a choice that night. Perhaps in a moment of rage, perhaps in a moment of despair, perhaps in a moment where all his problems and frustrations converged on this one point. He pulled a trigger, and Vanessa died. Her family still lives with that loss every single day. Every holiday without her, every birthday that passes uncelebrated, every accomplishment she would have achieved, now only imagined. The grandchildren Vanessa's mother will never hold, the wedding that will never happen, the career that was cut short before it even began. This is the true cost of violence. Not just the life lost, but all the lives affected by that loss. The ripples spreading outward, touching family, friends, colleagues, neighbors. A community forever changed because one person decided another person's life was worth less than their own pain. And so we come to the end of Vanessa's story, a young woman with everything ahead of her, whose life was stolen by someone who claimed to care for her. It's a story that repeats itself too often, in too many places in too many ways. But tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps take a moment to think about Vanessa not as a victim, but as a person. Someone's daughter, someone's classmate, someone's neighbor, a young woman with dreams and plans and a smile that lit up a room. Remember that behind every true crime story is a real person whose life mattered, whose absence leaves a hole that can never truly be filled. Vanessa Coakley mattered. Her life had value and meaning beyond the violence that ended it. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight we're going to explore a story from Philadelphia, a case that unfolded slowly over many months, revealing truths that were buried in the New Jersey Painlands. This is a story about a young mother, a dangerous relationship, and a family's relentless search for answers. This is the story of Teneki Daniels. In the early 2000s, South Philadelphia was a neighborhood of row houses and tight-knit communities, where families had known each other for generations. The streets were lined with corner stores and familiar faces. Among those faces was a 27-year-old woman named Teneki Daniels. Teneki was a mother of 3 young boys. Yazim, her eldest, was 12 years old. Damon was 10, and little Yamin was only 3. Like many mothers in the neighborhood, Teneki's days revolved around her children. She stayed in close contact with her own mother, Gail Daniels, who lived nearby in the Grays Ferry section of the city. The bond between mother and daughter was strong. They spoke regularly, and Gail knew her daughter's routines, her habits, her voice. Teneki had struggled with some difficulties in her life. She had dealt with substance abuse issues in the past, something that had led to occasional brushes with the law. In 2004, she had been arrested for shoplifting in Lower Merion Township, a suburban area just outside Philadelphia. These were the kinds of troubles that many people face when trying to navigate difficult circumstances. But through it all, Teneki remained devoted to her children. Her family knew that no matter what challenges she faced, she would never simply disappear from her boys' lives. Yet there was another presence in Teneka's life, one that would prove far more dangerous than any personal struggle she faced. His name was Glenn Hansen. Glenn Hansen was in his 40s, nearly 20 years older than Teneki. He worked as a maintenance man at a high-rise apartment building in the Overbrook section of Philadelphia, in the 1100 block of North 63rd Street. Sometimes Teneki stayed with him there, other times she stayed with her mother. The relationship was complicated, tumultuous, marked by a pattern that would become all too clear. Glenn Hansen had a criminal history. In 1993, he had been convicted of rape in Bucks County and served time in prison. After his release, he remained on the radar of law enforcement. In early 2005, he was on probation, following a drunk driving arrest. These were not simply mistakes from a distant past. They formed a pattern of behavior that spoke to something darker in Hansen's character. But it was his relationship with Teneki that would reveal the true depths of his capacity for violence. Take another slow breath. Let your muscles relax. We're moving now to the spring of 2005, to the events that would set everything in motion. On April 7th, 2005, something terrible happened. The exact details of that night exist in fragments, in police reports and emergency room records. What we know is this: Teneki Daniels was found walking on North 66th Street in Overbrook. She was bruised. She was stunned. She was half-clothed. When the police arrived, they saw a woman who had been beaten. The injuries were serious enough that Teneki needed medical attention. Her wrist was broken, requiring a cast. Her neck was injured badly enough that she needed to wear a brace. The assault had been severe, deliberate, and frightening. Glenn Hansen was arrested and charged with domestic assault. This was not a minor altercation. This was a beating that sent a woman to the emergency room. Teneki made the difficult decision to press charges against her boyfriend. A court hearing was scheduled for May 23rd, 2005. On that day, Teneki was expected to testify about what Glenn had done to her. For Glenn Hansen, the prospect of that testimony was terrifying, not because of guilt or shame, but because of consequences. He had already served time for rape. He was currently on probation. Another violent offense, especially one that sent a woman to the hospital, could mean a return to prison, And for someone like Hansen, someone who had spent years behind bars, that thought was unbearable. In the weeks after the assault, Taniki stayed with her mother. She spoke with Gail about the upcoming court date. She was nervous, as anyone would be. Testifying against someone you had been in a relationship with is never easy. There's fear, there's complicated emotion, there's the weight of knowing your words will have consequences. But Taniki was determined to go through with it. She wanted to tell the truth about what had happened to her. Glenn Hansen, meanwhile, had other plans. The night of May 11th, 2005 was quiet in South Philadelphia. As you relax now, picture a spring evening in the city. The air was growing warmer. Windows were open. The sounds of the neighborhood drifted through the streets. Very early on the morning of May 12th, around 3 or 4 in the morning, Taneki called her mother. Gail answered the phone, half asleep, and heard her daughter's voice. Taneki told her mother that she was at Glenn's apartment in Overbrook. She was gathering her belongings. She was leaving him for good. She would be home by 6 in the morning. Gail must have felt a sense of relief. Her daughter was finally ending this dangerous relationship. Soon, Taneki would be safely home, and they could move forward with the court case. Justice would be served. Taneki would testify, and Glenn would face consequences for what he had done. 6 in the morning came and went. Taneki did not arrive home. Gail waited. The morning stretched into afternoon. Still no Taneki, no phone call, no explanation. For a mother who spoke with her daughter regularly, who knew her daughter's voice and habits and patterns, the silence was deafening. Days passed. Gail called around to family members, to friends, to anyone who might have seen Taneki. No one had heard from her. This was extraordinarily unusual. Taneki was a mother of 3 young children. She would never simply vanish without a word. She would never abandon her boys. May 23rd arrived. This was the day Taneki was supposed to appear in court. Gail went to the courthouse, hoping against hope that her daughter would be there. But when the hearing was called, Taneki Daniels did not appear. The courtroom waited. The judge grew impatient, and then the reality settled in. Taneki was missing. Gail filed a missing persons report that same day. She told the police everything she knew. The last phone call. The plan to come home. The fact that Taneki's boyfriend Glenn Hansen was the last person known to have seen her alive. When police questioned Glenn Hansen about Taneki's disappearance, his story was simple and consistent. He said that Taneki had left his apartment around 5 in the morning on May 12th. She had packed her belongings. After they decided to break up, a white SUV had pulled up outside the building. Taneki got into the vehicle, and he never saw her again. He had no idea where she went. The story was clean. Too clean. But without evidence, without a body, the police could only investigate and wait. Taneki's family refused to accept that she was simply gone. They plastered their South Philadelphia neighborhood with flyers. They offered a reward. State Representatives Harold James and Babette Josephs partnered with the Citizens Crime Commission and put up $7,500 to help with the search. Friends, neighbors, and community members kept Taneki's name alive, hoping someone somewhere had seen something. Gail took in 2 of Taneki's sons, Yasim and Yamin. Damon went to live with his father. The family tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for the children. But how do you explain to young boys that their mother has vanished? Weeks turned into months. Summer came and went. Fall arrived. Winter settled over Philadelphia. Still, there was no sign of Taneki Daniels. The family clung to hope, but with each passing day, that hope grew more fragile. And all the while, Glenn Hansen went about his life, working his maintenance job, living in his apartment, carrying the weight of a terrible secret. New Jersey Pine Barrens, also known as the Pinelands, stretch across more than 1 million acres of coastal plain. It's a vast wilderness of pine and oak forests, cranberry bogs, and sandy soil. The area is remote, beautiful, and largely untouched. The Brendan T. Burns State Forest sits within this expanse, a place where nature exists in quiet isolation. On April 24th, 2006, nearly a year after Taneki's disappearance, a hunter was moving through the woods in Woodland Township. Burlington County. The spring air should have been fresh and clean, but the hunter noticed something unusual. A powerful odor, the smell of death. Experienced outdoorsmen know that smell. It's unmistakable. But this seemed too strong to be a deer carcass or some other animal that had died in the brush. The hunter began looking around more carefully, and then he saw it, disturbed ground. A patch of earth that looked unnatural, tarp protruding from the soil. Pine cones scattered deliberately across the surface, as if someone had tried to camouflage the area. And there, partially exposed, were human bones. The hunter immediately called the police. New Jersey State Police arrived at the scene, along with investigators from Burlington County. What they found was a shallow grave containing a body that had been buried for a long time. The remains were wrapped tightly in painter's tarp and sealed with duct tape at both ends. A plastic Walmart bag covered the head. The body had decomposed significantly in the year it had been buried there, leaving mostly skeletal remains. The medical examiner, Dr. Dante Ragassa, arrived to examine the site. The body was badly decomposed, making identification difficult. They could determine it was the body of a black woman, but little else. The face was gone. Soft tissue had largely disappeared. There were no obvious signs of trauma that might indicate cause of death. Though Ragassa initially noted asphyxiation as a possible cause based on the positioning in the plastic bag. But there was one crucial detail that would make all the difference. Among the bones, investigators found something metal. A surgical pin. The kind of pin that doctors use to repair broken bones. This pin had been inserted into a leg bone, suggesting the person had suffered a significant injury at some point in their life. That evening, the local news carried a story about the discovery of human remains in the Pinelands. A family in South Philadelphia was watching. Tenida Daniels, Teniki's older sister, saw the broadcast. Her heart must have sunk. Could this be Teniki? The next day, detectives from the Philadelphia Police Department arrived at the Daniels home. They needed to know if Teniki had ever had any surgeries, any broken bones, anything that might help identify the remains. Gail told them about the car accident months before Teniki disappeared. She had been in an automobile accident that left her with multiple injuries. Her nose had been broken. Her ankle had been shattered. Doctors had inserted metal pins to hold the bone together while it healed. The investigators contacted the hospital where Teniki had been treated. They obtained her medical records. The description of the pin matched exactly the pin found with the remains in the Pinelands. But they needed to be absolutely certain. Forensic experts took what little skin remained on the fingers of the corpse and carefully rehydrated it. Through this painstaking process, they were able to obtain fingerprints. Those prints were compared to fingerprints on file from Teniki's 2004 arrest in Lower Marion Township. The match was positive. The body buried in the shallow grave in the New Jersey Pine Barrens was Teniki Daniels. After almost a year of hoping, of searching, of holding on to the possibility that Teniki might still be alive somewhere, the family finally had their answer. But it was the answer every family dreads. Teniki wasn't coming home. She had been dead all along, buried in a remote forest nearly 50 miles from Philadelphia. The case was now officially a homicide investigation, and the prime suspect was obvious. Glenn Hansen, the man who had beaten Teniki so badly she needed medical attention. The man who had everything to lose if she testified against him. The man who was the last person to see her alive. But proving Hansen killed Tani would not be easy. The body had been buried for a year. The exact cause of death could not be determined with certainty. The medical examiner classified it as a homicide by undetermined means. There was no forensic evidence directly linking Hansen to the crime. No witnesses. No murder weapon. No confession. The investigation continued. Detectives interviewed Hansen again. He maintained his story. Teniki had left his apartment in a white SUV, and he never saw her again. He even told Teneki's family that he had heard she had moved to Texas. When they asked him where she was, he acted as if he was just as confused as everyone else. But the detectives didn't believe him. They continued to investigate, to interview people who knew Hansen, to search for any crack in his story. Months passed. The case seemed to be going cold. And then finally someone came forward with information that would change everything. Kelly Hansen was Glenn Hansen's younger sister. She was 41 years old, living her own life, but still connected to her older brother in the complicated way that families often are. Glenn had always been domineering, controlling. Throughout their lives, Kelly had learned to be careful around him. He had even assaulted her in the past, an incident that had landed him in legal trouble. After Taniki's body was discovered, Kelly found herself in a terrible position. She knew something that had been weighing on her for over a year, something that her brother had told her in confidence, something that made her afraid. In October 2006, Kelly wrote a letter to a friend. In that letter, she described what her brother had told her about Taniki's death. She gave the letter to her friend for safekeeping, perhaps as insurance, perhaps as evidence of the truth in case something happened to her. Because Kelly was terrified that if she told the police what she knew, she might end up in a shallow grave herself. Eventually, the weight became too much to bear. Kelly contacted the authorities. She told them she needed to talk about her brother. She told them what Glenn had confided in her.
According to Kelly, Glenn had called her on or around May 12th, 2005. He was panicked. He said he needed her help. He said something terrible had happened. Kelly went to his apartment, and there, her brother told her what he had done.
He said he had killed Tanike. He said he had placed a pillow over her face and pressed down while she screamed and kicked. He held it there until she stopped moving, until she stopped breathing, until she was dead. He killed her because he couldn't let her testify against him. He couldn't go back to prison. But the horror didn't end there. According to Kelly's statement, Glenn told her that after Taneke was dead, he had violated her body. And then he wrapped her in painter's tarp, sealed it with duct tape, and prepared to dispose of her remains. He asked Kelly to help him. He asked her to come with him to bury the body. And Kelly, terrified of what her brother might do to her if she refused, agreed. Kelly described 2 trips to the Pine Barrens with her brother. The first was in the spring of 2005, shortly after Taneki's death. Glenn drove them to a remote area in the Brendan T. Burns State Forest. Kelly watched as he buried Taneke in a shallow grave. He covered the grave with pine cones, trying to camouflage it, trying to mask the scent of decomposition. The second trip was later that summer. Glenn said he needed to check on the grave. He was worried that the smell might attract animals. He wanted to put more pine cones on the site to make sure it remained hidden. Kelly accompanied him again. She remembered him standing at the grave site, crying out to the woods, saying, "I'm sorry. I love you." When Kelly first spoke to detectives in 2006, she did not tell them this version of events. At that initial interview, conducted with her brother, waiting in an adjacent room at his attorney's office, Kelly said that Glenn had told her Taneke died of a drug overdose. She said Glenn panicked because he was afraid of going to prison due to his open criminal cases, and so he decided to hide the body instead of calling the police. This was the version Kelly told when she was too afraid to tell the whole truth. But in subsequent interviews with New Jersey State Police detectives, Kelly changed her story. She told them what really happened. She described the murder, the burial, the trips to the grave, and she could prove she was telling the truth. She knew exactly where the grave was located. She led detectives directly to the remote spot in the Pine Barrens where Taneke's body had been found. Kelly also provided another piece of critical evidence, a tape recording. In 2006, Glenn had called his sister and left a threatening voicemail message. On the tape, his voice was menacing. He told her, "You need to shut the fuck about what you know about this case." He was trying to intimidate her into silence, trying to ensure she would never reveal what he had told her. But Kelly did reveal it. And in exchange for her testimony, prosecutors granted her immunity from prosecution. She would not be charged as an accessory to the crime. Instead, she would become the star witness in the case against her brother. It took years for the case to come to trial. Glenn Hansen was arrested on November 2nd, 2006, and charged with first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. But the legal process moved slowly. Pre-trial motions, evidence gathering, witness preparation, all of this took time. It wasn't until May 2011, 6 years after Taneke was last seen, that the trial finally began in Philadelphia Common Pleas Court. Judge Shelley Robbins knew presided over the proceedings. Assistant District Attorney Gail Fairman led the prosecution. Glenn Hansen was represented by defense attorneys Timothy J. Tarpey and Michael P. Parkinson. The jury consisted of 7 men and 5 women, ordinary citizens tasked with determining whether Glenn Hansen was a murderer. The courtroom was tense from the first day. Gail Daniels, Taneki's mother, sat in the gallery every single day of the 5-day trial. She had waited 6 years for this moment. She had endured 6 years of grief, of not knowing, and then of knowing the worst possible truth. Now she would hear every detail, every piece of evidence, every argument about how her daughter died. The key to the prosecution's case was Kelly Hansen's testimony. When Kelly took the stand, she was visibly nervous. Her voice was quiet, sometimes barely audible. She paused for long periods before answering questions, sometimes as long as 30 seconds. She squeezed her eyes shut as if trying to block out terrible images. When prosecutors asked if there was some reason she was so nervous, Kelly said, "My brother. All the intimidation." Judge New allowed the prosecution to play the recording of Glenn's threatening phone message. The jury heard his voice, cold and menacing, ordering his sister to keep quiet. The impact was significant. Kelly then read aloud the letter she had written in October 2006, the letter she had given to a friend for safekeeping. In a quiet but clear voice, she described everything her brother had told her: the smothering, the desecration of Taneki's body, the burial, the return trips to the grave, the words he had cried out to the forest. She also testified about the intimidation she had faced from her brother. Her fear that she might end up like Taneke, but always in the back of my brain, I think, what if Kelly ends up the same way as Taneke? She had written. The defense team argued that Kelly was lying. They contended that her first statement that Taneke died of an overdose and Glenn panicked was the true version. They suggested that Kelly changed her story because she was afraid of being charged as an accomplice. They argued that the medical examiner's initial finding of asphyxiation had pressured investigators to believe Kelly's second version because it fit what they wanted to believe. The defense called their own medical expert, Dr. Ian Hood, a former chief medical examiner from Philadelphia, testified that he disagreed with some aspects of the original autopsy. He said that smothering would not cause a neck bone to break, and he believed the broken vertebra was from Taneke's earlier car accident. He also noted there was no evidence of drugs in what remained of the body. But Dr. Hood also testified that he believed Taneke had been murdered. When asked if there was any possibility this was a drug overdose, as the defense suggested, Hood was firm. "Absolutely a murder," he said. He pointed out that overdose victims are not typically wrapped carefully in tarp and buried with such secrecy. "I've seen hundreds of drug dumps," Hood testified. "Usually they are simply left in place." The prosecution also presented evidence from a New Jersey State Police detective named Brian Hoare. Hoare testified about a seemingly minor detail that proved significant: a traffic accident. On May 15th, 2005, just 3 days after Taneke's disappearance, Glenn Hansen was involved in a minor fender bender on Route 532 in Burlington County, New Jersey. The accident was near the entrance to Byrne State Forest, where Taneke's body would later be found. The date and location corresponded exactly with one of the dates Kelly said she accompanied her brother to the grave. This detail corroborated Kelly's testimony in a way that was difficult to dismiss. If Kelly was making everything up, how would she know about a minor traffic accident on a specific date near the burial site? Glenn Hansen did not testify in his own defense. He sat at the defense table, a tall, gaunt man with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, watching the proceedings with clenched jaw. As his sister testified against him, he glared at her from across the courtroom. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for about 6 hours over 2 days. And on May 24th, 2011, they reached a verdict. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, Glenn Hansen's face showed a slight smile. Perhaps he believed the defense had succeeded in creating reasonable doubt. Perhaps he thought his sister's testimony wouldn't be enough. Perhaps he still believed he could escape justice for what he had done. But as the jury forewoman stood and read the verdict, that smile disappeared. His eyebrows arched. His expression fell. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of abuse of corpse. Gail Daniels, who had sat through every moment of the trial, wept quietly. After 6 years of waiting, of grieving, of seeking answers, she finally had justice for her daughter. "I'm just glad it's over," she told reporters afterward. "I'm just glad he got his just desserts." A first-degree murder conviction in Pennsylvania carries an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no sentencing hearing needed, no deliberation over punishment. Glenn Hansen would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The prosecutors had not sought the death penalty, so prison would be his fate until the end of his days. Judge New set a formal sentencing date for the following day, though it was merely a formality. The sentence was mandatory and unchangeable. Glenn Hansen, the man who had beaten Tanny so severely. She needed medical care. The man who had killed her to silence her. The man who had violated her body and buried her in a remote forest like garbage would never be free again. Taneki's three sons, Yasin Damon and Yamin, grew up without their mother. They were raised by family members who did their best to give them stability and love in the wake of unimaginable loss. Their mother never got to see them graduate from school, never got to watch them become young men, never got to be part of their lives beyond those early years. Kelly Hansen, who had lived with the terrible knowledge of what her brother did for over a year, was free to move forward with her own life. She had done the right thing despite her fear, despite the intimidation. Her testimony had been crucial in bringing her brother to justice. And in a remote section of the New Jersey Pine Barrens, the site where Taneke Daniels lay buried for nearly a year remains a quiet place. The pine trees continue to grow. The sandy soil continues to shift with the seasons. The forest has reclaimed the area, leaving no visible trace of the tragedy that occurred there. But Taneke is not forgotten. Her family remembers her. Her community remembers her. Her story serves as a reminder of the dangers of domestic violence, of the escalating patterns of abuse that can lead to tragedy, of the importance of believing victims when they come forward. Taneke Daniels was 27 years old when she died. She was a daughter, a mother, a sister. She deserved to live, to watch her children grow, to find happiness and peace. Instead, she became another victim of intimate partner violence. Another name in the long, heartbreaking list of women killed by men who claimed to love them. May her memory be a blessing. May her story encourage others to speak up, to seek help, to escape dangerous relationships before it's too late. And may we remember that behind every true crime story is a real person, a real family, a real loss that echoes through the years. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Tonight we journey together through a story that unfolds slowly, like pages turning in the dim light of evening. This is a tale of lives intersecting in the coastal town of Bournemouth, where the sea meets the cliffs and where darkness can hide beneath the most ordinary surfaces. Take a deep breath. This is the story of Simon Shotton, a man whose life ended in the late summer of 2023. In circumstances that would shock a quiet seaside community and reveal the devastating consequences of addiction, manipulation, and violence. Simon Shotton was 49 years old when his story came to its tragic end. To understand what happened to him, we must first understand who he was, and the winding path that led him to Bournemouth in the summer of 2023. Simon was born into a family that would later speak of him with love, despite the complicated relationship addiction had forced between them. He had children, a son named Wesley among them, who remembered his father as someone filled with love and care, even when circumstances made that love difficult to show consistently. From an early age, Simon struggled. Life presented him with challenges that seemed to multiply as the years passed. But he was a hard worker, the kind of man who would take whatever employment he could find. Agency work, fairground positions, warehouse jobs. He did his best to stay in touch with his mother and his sons, even as the demons of addiction pulled at him from all sides. By his adult years, Simon's life had become increasingly chaotic. Drugs and alcohol had taken hold, pulling him into a world where survival often meant making compromises, where the line between victim and participant blurred in ways that made judgment difficult and compassion essential. He lived in Ipswich, Suffolk, for many years. In that town, in the flat landscapes of East Anglia, Simon became entangled in the world of county lines drug dealing, that modern scourge where organized criminals take over the homes of vulnerable people, using their addresses as bases for drug distribution. In April 2020, police attended Simon's address on Woodbridge Road in Ipswich. They found 188 wraps of heroin and crack cocaine, Simon explained to the officers that his home had been taken over by county lines dealers in exchange for selling drugs alongside a youth they had placed in his house. He was given 2 wraps of drugs each night. It was a form of payment, a form of control, a form of imprisonment. The court found him guilty of possessing crack cocaine and heroin with intent to supply. He received a 2-year prison sentence, suspended for 2 years. But addiction is not deterred by suspended sentences. By February 2022, Simon was back in Ipswich Crown Court. This time he was sentenced to 3 years and 1 month in prison for possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, along with possessing a bladed article. He served his time. In September 2022, Simon was released on license, stepping back into a world that felt both familiar and threatening. He had received threats about returning to Ipswich. There were drug debts. People whispered to the tune of £10,000. Returning to Suffolk felt like walking into a trap. So Simon made a choice. He decided to move to Bournemouth, a Victorian resort town on the south coast, where the beaches stretch golden and the pier reaches out into the English Channel. Perhaps he hoped for a fresh start. Perhaps he simply hoped for survival. Under the supervision of the probation service, Simon made the coastal town his new home. His probation officer arranged monthly meetings, coordinating through text messages. They even provided him with a SIM card for a mobile phone, a lifeline of sorts. But Simon had nowhere to live. Housing was scarce. Money was scarcer. He found shelter in the derelict remains of the Montbijou Hotel on Manor Road, a building that had been boarded up for approximately 10 years. The place was very run down in the slow process of being renovated. Simon lived in a small room with makeshift curtains and a bed. He paid no rent. Instead, he told his probation officer there was an informal agreement. He would stay there as security, deterring squatters from taking over the property. It was a precarious existence. But Simon was trying. He was checking in with probation, trying to stay clean, trying to navigate the impossible maze of addiction and recovery, while homeless and alone in a new town. Then, in the summer of 2023, Simon met Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira. Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira first met in July 2018 during a drug rehabilitation program. At that time, they were 2 people trying to climb out of the same dark well. 2 people who understood the grip of addiction because they wore its chains themselves. They were not romantically involved at first. Their lives moved in separate orbits for several years. But social media has a way of reconnecting people. In April or May 2022, Benjamin began commenting on some of Debbie's posts on Facebook. Messages were exchanged. They arranged to see one another. A spark ignited. Within a few months of starting their relationship, Benjamin moved into Debbie's flat at 18B Aylesbury Road in the Boscombe suburb of Bournemouth. They had been living together for over a year. By the summer of 2023, Debbie was 39 years old, a woman struggling with her own complex constellation of challenges. She had OCD and agoraphobia, conditions that caused panic attacks and made leaving her home feel like an insurmountable task. She was seeking help from doctors and from an organization called We Are With You, trying to manage her anxiety. She was also a methadone user, caught in the slow attempt to move away from harder drugs. Benjamin Atkins was 49, the same age as Simon Schotten. He had 16 convictions for 26 offenses in his past, though none recent enough to be immediately relevant to what would happen. He was a father of 2. Neighbors who knew the couple described them initially as appearing to be a very happy couple, but beneath the surface things were changing. One neighbor who had known Debbie since she first moved into the address noticed a transformation after Benjamin appeared in her life. Debbie's appearance became slightly gaunt. She got thinner and appeared more pale. She seemed less outwardly friendly than before. Visits from Debbie's family to her address began to tail off, growing less frequent until they stopped altogether. Benjamin explained to neighbors that Debbie's changed appearance was due to an eating disorder, but the neighbor began to suspect drugs were involved, that perhaps Benjamin's arrival had coincided with a return to old habits. Despite whatever darkness was growing in their lives, the couple appeared affectionate in public. They held hands, they smiled. From the outside, they looked like any couple navigating life together, bound by the complicated ties of love and dependency. Into this relationship in the summer of 2023 came Simon Schotten. He needed a place to stay. He had access to drugs. and Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira were using again, caught once more in the undertow of addiction they had tried so hard to escape. An arrangement was made. Simon could stay with them in exchange for providing crack cocaine and heroin. Instead of paying rent with money, he would pay with drugs, supplying them with 30 to 40 pounds worth on a regular basis. Sometimes Simon would sleep on the sofa. Other times he pitched a tent in a small garden behind the flat. For a while this arrangement functioned, however dysfunctionally. 3 people, 3 addicts, sharing space and substances in a ground floor flat in a Victorian town by the sea. But arrangements built on addiction are inherently unstable. And this one would soon collapse in the most terrible way imaginable. As July turned to August in 2023, tensions in the flat on Olsbury Road began to rise. Simon went by the name Rio in his drug-dealing life, and he was conscientious about maintaining contact with certain people. He had a friend, a woman he texted regularly. In those messages, he began to reveal his growing unease about his living situation. The general gist of his messages, this friend would later tell police, was that Simon is staying with a male who was not nice to him, and a female who was nice to him. Benjamin Atkins, it seemed, was becoming increasingly difficult. He borrowed money from Simon, money that was never returned. Debbie, trying to keep the peace, would pay Simon back herself. But behind Debbie's back, Benjamin was doing something darker. He was threatening Simon, blackmailing him into giving extra drugs on the side, beyond the agreed amount for rent. The leverage Benjamin used was brutal in its simplicity. He would report Simon's drug dealing to his probation officer, which would result in Simon being returned to prison for breaching his license. Simon was trapped. He had nowhere else to go. The threats from Ipswich still hung over him. The debts still loomed. And now, in the place he had found temporary shelter, he was being manipulated and threatened by the man whose home he was staying in. The evidence of this would later be found in text exchanges between Simon and another acquaintance named Rafal Krasinski, and in conversations with a woman named Donna McGuire. Simon was scared. He was trying to find somewhere else to stay. He realized it was no longer safe for him at the house on Aylesbury Road. But finding alternative accommodation when you are homeless, under probation supervision, and caught in the web of addiction is not simple. Simon was trying, but time was running out. On the night of August 17th, going into the early hours of August 18th, 2023, the situation in the flat reached a breaking point. All 3 of them had been taking drugs that night. When the drugs ran out, Benjamin and Debbie wanted more. In the pre-dawn darkness, while Simon was distracted, Benjamin took money from Simon's wallet. Debbie acted as a distraction, keeping Simon's attention elsewhere while the theft occurred. With the stolen money, Benjamin and Debbie left the flat around 4:30 in the morning to score more drugs on the street. They returned around 7 in the morning, just as dawn was breaking over Bournemouth. Simon's phone rang. He answered. He had discovered the theft. He was understandably angry. He demanded his money back. Benjamin Atkins laughed at him. He brushed it off. When they returned to the flat with the newly purchased drugs, Benjamin and Debbie did not share them with Simon. Instead, they went off to the bedroom together, closing the door behind them. What happened next would be the subject of testimony, cross-examination, and ultimately a jury's verdict. According to Benjamin Atkins's later testimony, when he and Debbie returned home with the drugs that morning, they were confronted by an enraged Simon Schotten. In Benjamin's account, Simon was holding a syringe aggressively, threatening violence. Simon allegedly said, "You'd better have my money or I am going to kill you." Benjamin claimed that he tried to de-escalate the situation, promising to sell some items to repay the 30 thords he owed. But Simon, Benjamin said, was frothing at the mouth, livid with rage. Then, according to Benjamin's version of events, Simon pulled out a knife. He poked Benjamin in the stomach with it a couple of times. A fight erupted. Benjamin claimed he tried to defend himself by grabbing the knife. He described the scene as carnage, insisting that Simon was trying to kill him, and that there was no doubt about it. In his testimony, Benjamin said he tried to defend himself by stabbing Simon with the end of a plastic hairbrush, until it snapped, then by hitting him over the head several times with a speaker until Simon stopped moving. When Simon finally lay still, Benjamin checked his pulse. There was none. Simon Schotten, 49 years old, father, son, troubled soul, was dead. This was Benjamin's story. His claim of self-defense, but the jury would not believe it. The physical evidence, the aftermath, and Benjamin's own actions told a different story, one of ferocious violence that went far beyond what self-defense could justify. The fight took place somewhere in the flat, the bedroom, the hallway. The exact location was uncertain, but what was certain was the violence of it. The judge would later describe the attack as ferocious and unnecessary. Even if Simon had started the confrontation, even if there had been some element of Benjamin defending himself initially, the level of force used was so extreme that it crossed the line into murder. After Simon lay dead, Debbie was in the bedroom. She would later claim she knew nothing of what was happening, that she was shocked when Benjamin told her what had occurred. But the prosecution would paint a different picture. One of a woman who, if she did not participate in the killing, certainly participated in what came after. Benjamin took Simon's crack pipe from the dead man's pocket. It was loaded with crack cocaine. Benjamin and Debbie smoked it together. They were in the bedroom for approximately an hour or more, though Debbie would later admit her sense of time could be wrong due to the drugs. Then Benjamin told Debbie he was going to deal with this. He told her not to worry about anything. He said he knew what he was doing. He assured her that no one was going to look for Simon. No one was going to be bothered. No one was going to care. All she had to do, he told her, was keep quiet. For reasons he could not later explain, Benjamin moved Simon's body into the garden during daylight hours, even though the garden was overlooked by neighboring properties. It was a risk, moving a body in broad daylight, but perhaps the drugs made risk feel distant and unreal. That same afternoon, August 18th, just hours after Simon's death, CCTV cameras captured Debbie Pereira walking calmly into a cash creator's shop in Boscombe. She was selling Simon's mobile phone, the phone that was still warm with his life, the phone that contained his contacts, his messages, his connection to the outside world. Debbie sold it for cash. The couple was sweating in the footage. They were selling other items too, things that belonged to Simon, power banks, deck things, converting the dead man's possessions into money for more drugs. This was the beginning of what would become an elaborate and horrifying cover-up, one that would shock the seaside community of Bournemouth and haunt everyone who learned its details. What Benjamin Atkins did next would test the limits of human comprehension. He waited until Debbie was asleep. Then, under the influence of what he would later describe as copious amounts of various drugs, he went into the garden. Simon's body lay there, covered. Benjamin had no plan, or so he would claim. His plan, he said, was simply to get absolutely intoxicated on drugs and try to live his life as best he could, knowing he had taken another man's life. But a body cannot be hidden easily. It tells its story through decay, through smell, through the simple fact of its existence taking up space in the world. Benjamin knew this, on some level, and so in the darkness of that August night, he began to cut. He had stolen a hacksaw from a local shop, a Wilco store. Debbie had acted as a decoy during the theft, keeping the staff's attention elsewhere while Benjamin slipped the tool into a bag. They had also purchased black bin liners, bleach and silver tape, materials for cleanup, materials for disposal, in the utility room of the flats. Benjamin systematically dismembered Simon Schotten's body. He would later admit to this, describing the act while claiming he would never have done it sober, that he was scared, traumatized, panicked, under extreme stress and the influence of drugs. The process took time. Days. Benjamin worked methodically, separating limbs from torso, sawing through bone and flesh. It must have been exhausting work, gruesome work, the kind of work that would stain not just hands but the very air of that flat with the evidence of its horror. Debbie, in the flat during much of this time, would claim she did not know what was happening, but the prosecution would argue otherwise. Someone performed an extensive cleaning operation, scrubbing blood from surfaces, bleaching away evidence. Benjamin would later reference the amount of bleach Debbie had used. The cleaning must have taken many days. Every surface had to be wiped, every trace of violence erased, as much as possible. Within the first week after Simon's death, Benjamin made his first disposal of remains. He told Debbie he was going to get methadone from the chemist. Instead, he cycled through the streets of Boscombe with Simon's legs in a bag, riding through the summer sunshine until he reached the manor steps zigzag path on Boscombe Cliff Road. There, in the bushes, he deposited the wrapped packages of what had once been a man's legs. Approximately 1 to 2 days later, Benjamin removed Simon's torso from where it had been wrapped in tarpaulin in the garden. He placed it in a suitcase, one he had taken from a wall where someone had left it. Then, methodically, he continued his disposal efforts, leaving parts of Simon Schotten scattered across the Boscombe area like a terrible breadcrumb trail. Benjamin also tried to burn some of Simon's remains in a fire pit in the back garden. He attempted to burn Simon's head, thinking perhaps that fire would reduce it to ash, would erase this final piece of evidence. But human bone does not burn easily, not in a garden fire pit. The head did not completely incinerate. Frustrated, Benjamin wrapped the remaining body parts and continued distributing them across the town. Meanwhile, life in the flat on Aylesbury Road continued in its macabre normalcy. Benjamin and Debbie lived in the space where a man had died, where his body had been cut apart, where his blood had soaked into surfaces they now walked across daily. They continued to use drugs. They continued their relationship. Neighbors noticed nothing particularly unusual, but secrets of this magnitude cannot stay buried forever. And soon, a stranger's discovery would set in motion the machinery of justice. It was August 26, 2023. 8 days had passed since Simon Schotten's death. A member of the public was walking on the manor steps' zigzag footpath, that scenic route along the Boscombe Cliffs where tourists and locals alike walk to enjoy views of the sea. This person was taking shelter under a tree when a package suddenly landed with a thud beside them. The package was wrapped with gray masking tape. When the person moved closer to examine what had fallen, they realized with dawning horror that the shape was that of a human foot. Some of it had become exposed through the wrapping. The police were called immediately. Officers arrived and began a careful search of the area. They found a second package. DNA testing would later confirm that the body parts belonged to Simon Schotten. A major investigation was launched. The Major Crime Investigation Team of Dorset Police took over. Initially, they had partial human remains and no victim identity. It was an investigator's nightmare. Evidence of murder, but no knowledge of who had died or who might be responsible. The meticulous work began. Scientific analysis to identify the deceased, canvassing of the area, review of CCTV footage, tracking of mobile phones. The breakthrough came through the phone. Detectives identified that a phone linked to Simon Schotten had been sold at a cash creator's store in Boscombe on the afternoon of Friday, August 18th, 2023. When they reviewed CCTV footage from the store, they saw Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira entering and selling the phone. This connection led police to 18B Aylesbury Road, where the couple lived. On the evening of Friday, September 1st, 2023, 2 weeks after the first remains were discovered, police officers arrived at the flat. They knocked. No answer. They searched the exterior of the property. An officer using a torch swept the beam across the garden. Behind a wheelbarrow, the officer saw something. A person's head visible to the side of the wheelbarrow. Someone was crouched down in the gap between the wheelbarrow and a ladder. When the person stood up, the officer recognized him as Benjamin Atkins. At 9:12 in the evening, the officer arrested Atkins on suspicion of murder. Later, Benjamin would claim he initially did not know it was the police approaching, that he was not sure if someone was trying to get him. Perhaps he was paranoid from drugs. Perhaps he knew his time was running out. Police seized a Solmobile phone from Benjamin on arrest. It was later found to belong to Simon Schotten, the phone potentially used for drug dealing. Now in the killer's possession. Inside the flat, officers arrested Debbie Pereira. Both arrests were recorded on police body-worn video cameras. Technology that would later provide crucial evidence about the couple's state of mind and their knowledge of what had occurred. The following day, September 2nd, police conducted a forensic search of the property. In the garden, they found 2 black bin bags. Inside were Simon Schotten's severed arms. On September 6th, 2023, more remains were discovered in Boscombe Chennine Gardens, a public park by the seafront. Simon's torso was found inside a black suitcase, covered with flies, emitting what witnesses described as a stench of death. Even then, the discoveries were not complete. Following information that Benjamin Atkins provided to his legal team before trial, police conducted searches in the Walpole Lane area of Boscombe from Wednesday, February 28, 2024. Search teams recovered a number of bone fragments, but parts of Simon Schotten have never been found. Most significantly, the majority of his head remains missing. Benjamin Atkins has never said what he did with it. His claim that it burned completely to ash in the garden fire pit has been dismissed as utterly implausible by forensic experts. Simon Schotten could not be buried completely. His family could not lay him fully to rest. This final indignity, this final cruelty, would weigh heavily on everyone involved in seeking justice for what had been done. The police investigation was painstaking and complex. Detective Chief Inspector Neil Third of Dorset Police's major crime investigation team led the efforts, coordinating a massive undertaking that would eventually involve thousands of hours of work. Officers reviewed countless hours of CCTV footage, tracking the movements of Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira in the days following Simon's death. The footage told a damning story, the couple walking through Boscombe with a hacksaw, Debbie acting as a decoy during the theft, Debbie entering the cash creator's shop, calm and composed, selling a dead man's phone, the couple moving through their daily lives as if nothing had happened, as if there were not body parts hidden in their garden and scattered across the neighborhood. Police interviewed neighbors, friends, associates. They built a timeline of Simon Schotten's last days, tracing his movements, his communications, his growing fear. They spoke with his female friend, who provided the text messages revealing Simon's unease about the man he was staying with. They contacted Simon's probation officer, who could verify his regular check-ins, his attempts to stay on the right path, despite his circumstances. They examined Simon's criminal history, not to judge him but to understand the full context of his life, and the situation that had led him to that flat on Aylesbury Road. The forensic work was extensive. Blood evidence, DNA from the recovered remains, analysis of the cleaning materials purchased, examination of the hacksaw. Every piece of physical evidence had to be carefully documented, tested, and prepared for court. One of the most revealing pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. When Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira were transported in a police van to their court hearing on September 2nd, police had installed a covert recording device in the vehicle. The couple's conversation was captured. In that recording, Benjamin could be heard telling Debbie about getting rid of the arms from the garden. But more chillingly, Debbie asked Benjamin if he regretted anything. His response was captured on tape. "I'll look him straight in the eye and say, yeah, I'd do it again and again and again. If you let me go today, I'd find another one and do it again. Drug dealers and pushers. Kill, decapitate, and eat them." This was not the voice of someone acting in traumatized self-defense. This was someone expressing a disturbing ideology, a willingness to kill repeatedly. It would prove to be some of the most damaging evidence against Benjamin Atkins. There was another recording from the van, equally disturbing. Benjamin asked Debbie, apparently seeking some strategy for his defense, if he admitted that he cooked Simon's head up and ate his cheeks, would it get him off the hook? Whether this was dark humor, genuine consideration, or something else entirely, it revealed a callousness that shocked everyone who heard it. This was a man joking about cannibalism, about the desecration of a human body, in a way that seemed to treat the whole situation as a strategic game rather than the horrific ending of another person's life. The investigation continued for months. By the time Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira were charged and their trial set, Dorset police had amassed a comprehensive case built on physical evidence, witness testimony, CCTV footage, and the defendant's own recorded words. In April 2024, 8 months after Simon Schotten's death, Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira stood trial at Winchester Crown Court. Both pleaded not guilty to murder. They also faced charges of perverting the course of justice and preventing the burial of a corpse. The trial would last approximately 6 weeks, a marathon of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal argument. The jury would hear details that would challenge their emotional endurance, forcing them to confront the worst of human capacity. Paul Cavan Casey led the prosecution. His task was to present the evidence in a way that revealed not just what had happened, but the deliberate choices made in the aftermath. He walked the jury through the timeline, from the theft of Simon's money to the discovery of his scattered remains. The defense for Benjamin Atkins was clear. Self-defense. Yes, he had killed Simon Schotten. Yes, he had dismembered the body. But the killing itself, he claimed, was justified. Simon had attacked him with a knife. He had fought for his life. The dismemberment, while admittedly horrific, was done in a state of drug-induced panic and fear. Benjamin took the stand. He described meeting Simon, the arrangement for Simon to stay with them, the growing tensions. He painted Simon as aggressive, threatening, dangerous. He described the confrontation on August 18th. Simon with a syringe, then a knife, coming at him with murderous intent. He admitted to the dismemberment, but framed it as the actions of someone traumatized, and under the influence of copious amounts of drugs. "I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't under the influence," he told the court. "I was scared, I was traumatized, I was panicked, I was under extreme stress. What I done was truly awful. It's horrendous what I have done, and I deserve to be punished for what I have done. I am sorry to his family. I am sorry to my family. It's difficult for me to be remorseful to a man who was trying to kill me in my own house." But the prosecution dismantled this narrative piece by piece. The physical evidence did not support a simple case of self-defense. The level of violence was ferocious, beyond what would be necessary to stop an attacker. The calculated disposal of the body, the selling of Simon's possessions, the extensive cleaning operation, the lies told to police, all of this painted a picture of murder, followed by deliberate cover-up, not panicked response to legitimate self-defense. The CCTV footage was damning. Debbie Pereira, hours after Simon's death, calmly selling his phone. The couple, days later, working together to steal a hacksaw. Their movements tracked through Boscombe as they distributed body parts across the neighborhood. And then there were the recordings. Benjamin's voice, captured in the police van, saying he would do it again and again, talking about killing, decapitating, and eating drug dealers. However much he might claim trauma and drug-induced panic, those words revealed something else entirely. Debbie Pereira's defense was that she was an innocent bystander, a victim herself of Benjamin's manipulation and violence. She claimed she was in the bedroom when Simon was killed, that she knew nothing about it until Benjamin told her afterward. She portrayed herself as controlled by Benjamin, powerless to stop what was happening or to report it to authorities. But the prosecution argued that Debbie was far more involved than she admitted. She had acted as a decoy during the hacksaw theft. She had sold Simon's phone. She had helped clean the flat, an extensive operation that must have made clear what had happened. She had lived in that flat for days while Benjamin cut up Simon's body, while he moved the parts through rooms she occupied. The evidence about the bleach came up. Benjamin's recorded comments. "You'd have had nothing. The amount of bleach you used." This suggested Debbie's participation in the cleanup was substantial, and no. On May 22nd, 2024, after hearing all the evidence, the jury reached their verdicts. Benjamin Atkins was found guilty of murder. The jury had rejected his claim of self-defense. Whatever had happened in that flat on August 18th, it was not justifiable killing. It was murder. Debbie Pereira was found not guilty of murder. The jury accepted that she had not participated in the actual killing of Simon Schotten. However, she was found guilty of perverting the course of justice. Her actions after the murder, her help in covering it up, her lies to police, these constituted a serious crime in their own right. Both had admitted during the trial to preventing the burial of a corpse. The evidence of this was impossible to deny. On July 26, 2024, Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira returned to Winchester Crown Court for sentencing. Mrs. Justice Stacy presided, and before passing sentence, she heard a victim impact statement from Simon Schotten's family. Simon's son Wesley, who was 19 years old when his father was killed, submitted a statement read by the prosecutor. Wesley spoke of a father who struggled with drink and drugs, struggles that impacted the time they could spend together. But through all the difficulties, Wesley remembered a father filled with love and care for his children. Wesley described Benjamin Atkins as evil. He said Atkins' children should be ashamed of what their father had done. The pain in those words was palpable. The grief of a young man who would never see his father again, who could not even bury all of his father's remains because the killer refused to say where they were. The family's full statement thanked everyone involved in bringing the case to justice. The police, the jury who had to sit through unpleasant evidence, and especially the family liaison officers who had supported them throughout the ordeal. They conducted themselves with dignity throughout, as the detective noted, even as they endured the unimaginable. Mrs. Justice Stacy addressed Benjamin Atkins directly. Her words were measured, but damning. She described the dismemberment, disposal, and concealment of Simon's body as particularly gruesome. She called his callousness shocking. She noted that he still refused to say where the rest of Simon's head was. She stated clearly that she did not accept his remorse as genuine, while acknowledging that Benjamin may have initially acted to some extent in self-defense. She emphasized that the ferocity of his attack showed he intended to kill Simon. The violence went far beyond what would be necessary for self-protection. She noted that the disposal of Simon's body would continue to cause great pain and distress to his family. Without a complete body to bury, without knowing what happened to their loved one's remains, they could not find closure. Benjamin Atkins was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years before he could be considered for parole. This meant that even after 19 years, release would not be automatic. He would need to convince the parole board that he no longer posed a danger to the public. Given the nature of his crime and his recorded statements about doing it again, that would be a high bar to clear. Turning to Debbie Pereira, the judge's words were equally firm. She described Debbie as a joint participant in perverting the course of justice. She emphasized that Debbie knew Simon's body was being chopped up in her utility room. She knew what was happening. She helped Atkins get rid of and sell Simon's belongings. She acted as a decoy while Atkins stole the hacksaw to cut up Simon's body. And the thorough cleaning afterward, which must have taken many days, could only have been done by Debbie. Debbie Pereira was sentenced to 4 years in prison. But this was not the end of the legal proceedings. The Solicitor General reviewed the case and determined that both sentences were unduly lenient under the scheme designed to catch sentences that fall too far below what justice requires. On October 15th, 2024, the case returned to the Court of Appeal. Louise Oakley, representing the Solicitor General, argued that the sentences did not adequately reflect the gravity of the crimes. She emphasized the systematic nature of the dismemberment, which took place over a number of days. She highlighted the attempt to burn Simon's head, and the fact that Atkins has never said what he did with the rest of it. She noted that Simon's belongings were sold after his death, adding insult to injury. The Court of Appeal agreed that the sentences were unduly lenient. Lord Justice Bean, sitting with Mr. Justice Johnson and Mrs. Justice Heather Williams, acknowledged the respect due to the trial judge who had heard all the evidence, but they concluded that even accounting for that, the sentences were too low. Benjamin Atkins's minimum term was increased from 19 to 21 years. Debbie Pereira's sentence was increased from 4 to 6 years. These adjusted sentences reflected the true horror of what had been done. Not just a killing, but the desecration of a human body, the callous disposal of remains, the extended effort to evade justice, and the ongoing refusal to allow the victim's family to properly lay their loved one to rest. Simon Shawton was 49 years old when he died. He leaves behind his children, including his son Wesley, who must carry the weight of this loss. He leaves behind a mother who loved him, despite everything. He leaves behind friends who knew both his struggles and his kindness. In life, Simon was complicated. He made mistakes. He got caught up in the world of drugs, both as user and dealer. He served time in prison. He owed debts. His life was precarious, unstable, lived on the margin, but he did not deserve what happened to him. No person, no matter their past, deserves to be murdered and dismembered. No family deserves to be denied the ability to bury their loved one whole. Detective Chief Inspector Neil Third of Dorset Police spoke after the conviction. He acknowledged that Simon was a troubled and vulnerable man who lived chaotically on the fringes of the Bournemouth drug scene. But he emphasized what happened to him was entirely deplorable. Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira, the detective said, took advantage of Simon's vulnerability to the degree that his life meant nothing to them when he had no more to give. After murdering him, they desecrated his body in the most horrific way, attempting to evade justice by chopping him up and dumping parts of him like rubbish. The casual nature of it, the everyday quality of the evil done, is perhaps what disturbs most. They smoked his crack pipe after killing him. They sold his phone hours later. They walked through sunny Bournemouth streets carrying pieces of him in bags and suitcases. They continued their lives as if nothing significant had happened. This case reveals uncomfortable truths about vulnerability, about how people on the margins of society can become victims precisely because they exist in spaces where normal protections and oversight don't reach. Simon was homeless. He was an addict. He was under probation supervision, but still fell through the cracks. He tried to check in with his probation officer. He tried to maintain connections with friends. He was trying in his way to survive. But he was also caught in an impossible situation. Threatened in Ipswich. Threatened in Bournemouth. With nowhere safe to go. The Montbijou Hotel, where he first sheltered, stands as a symbol of his precarious existence. A derelict building, boarded up, being slowly renovated while he lived in a small room, paying no rent. Existing in the liminal space between housed and homeless, between legitimate and illegitimate. When that situation became untenable, when he moved in with Benjamin and Debbie, he traded one form of precariousness for another. He thought he had found a solution, a place to stay in exchange for drugs. But he had walked into a trap. He was being exploited from the beginning, blackmailed, threatened, stolen from. And when he finally stood up for himself, when he demanded his stolen money back, when he allowed his anger to show, it cost him his life. The jury rejected Benjamin's claim of pure self-defense, and rightly so. The violence was too extreme. The Fafgare too calculated. The recorded statements too revealing. This was not a frightened man who defended himself and then panicked. This was someone capable of systematic violence, of treating another human being as disposable, of joking about killing more people in the same way. Debbie Pereira's role remains morally complex. The jury found her not guilty of murder itself, accepting perhaps that she was not the one who struck the blows. But they found her guilty of helping to cover it up. She knew what Benjamin had done. She knew what he was continuing to do as he dismembered Simon's body in their home. She helped. She lied. She sold the victim's belongings. Her sentence, even increased on appeal, may seem light compared to the horror of what occurred. But the law distinguishes between committing murder and helping to conceal it. The jury made that distinction. The judges at sentencing and on appeal respected it. For Simon Schotten's family, no sentence will ever be enough. No amount of justice can bring him back. No punishment can undo what was done to his body, to their peace of mind, to their ability to grieve properly. Wesley Schotten's words at sentencing captured this. His father was filled with love and care, despite all his struggles. But Wesley called Benjamin Atkins evil. Strong language, definitive language, the language of a son who watched his father reduced to scattered remains, who cannot fully bury his father because the killer refuses to say where all the pieces are. The refusal to disclose the location of Simon's head is perhaps Benjamin Atkins' final cruelty. It denies the family closure. It maintains power over the victim even after death and conviction. It says, implicitly, that even now Simon Schotten's remains are not his family's to fully claim. Dorset police conducted extensive searches based on information Atkins provided through his legal team before trial. They found bone fragments, but the majority of the head remains missing. His claim that it burned completely to ash has been dismissed as implausible. So whereas only Benjamin Atkins knows, and he is not telling, this case shook the community of Bournemouth. The discovery of body parts in public spaces, along walking paths, in parks, turned familiar landscapes into crime scenes. Residents walked past places where Simon's remains had been hidden, not knowing, continuing their daily lives while a terrible secret lay in the bushes. When the full story emerged, when people learned that this had happened in a ground floor flat in Boscombe, that neighbors had lived nearby while dismemberment occurred, there was a collective shudder. We live beside mysteries, beside hidden horrors, and often we never know until too late. The neighbors who saw Debbie's appearance change, who noticed her becoming gaunt and pale, who observed that her family stopped visiting. They saw signs. But what could they have done? What should they have done? It is easy in hindsight to say someone should have intervened, but in the moment, from the outside it is hard to know when concern crosses from appropriate to intrusive, when to respect privacy and when to investigate. This is the nature of intimate violence, of crimes that occur in private spaces. They unfold behind closed doors. The perpetrators wear normal faces in public. The couple held hands. They looked affectionate. No one suspected that they were walking through town with pieces of a dead man in their bags. The sea continues to break against the beaches of Bournemouth. The pier stretches into the channel. Tourists walk the promenade. The Victorian buildings stand as they have for over a century. Witnesses to countless lives, countless stories. Boscombe Cliff Road still offers its views. The manor steps zigzag path is still a scenic route. Buscomchine Gardens remain a pleasant park by the sea. But these places are marked now, changed by what happened there in the late summer of 2023. Simon Schoten's story is not unique in its elements. Drugs, homelessness, vulnerability, but it is unique in its particular tragedy. He was a real person with a real family who loved him. He had hopes, however modest. He was trying to navigate an impossible situation with limited options. His death was brutal. His dismemberment was horrifying. The disposal of his remains was degrading, and the refusal to disclose where all of him is buried compounds the cruelty even now. Benjamin Atkins sits in prison, serving a minimum of 21 years before he can even be considered for parole. He is 51 years old now. He will be at least 72 before he could potentially be released. More likely, he will spend the rest of his life incarcerated. His recorded words about doing it again, about killing and decapitating drug dealers, will follow him through every parole hearing, every assessment, every evaluation of risk. Debbie Pereira is serving 6 years. She will be released eventually, still relatively young, able to rebuild some version of a life. But she will carry this with her always, the knowledge that she was there, that she knew, that she helped hide what was done. And Simon Schoten's family continues to grieve, to remember, to carry the weight of his absence and the horror of how he left this world. There are broader questions this case raises about how we as a society treat those who live on the margins, about how addiction isolates and endangers, about how homelessness creates vulnerability, about how the criminal justice system sometimes serves more to cycle people through punishment than to address causes or provide genuine rehabilitation. Simon had been to prison twice for drug offenses. He was released on license, trying to comply with his probation, trying to stay out of trouble, but he had nowhere to live. He had debts he couldn't repay. He had threats he couldn't escape. The system supervised him but could not protect him. This is not to excuse his own choices or his own participation in the drug trade. It is simply to recognize that punishment alone does not solve the complex web of problems that lead people into these circumstances. And when people are caught in that web, they become vulnerable in ways that can be fatal. Simon Schoten's life mattered. His death matters. His story matters. Not because it is unique, but because it illuminates the shadows where vulnerable people exist, where terrible things can happen, where justice must work hard to reach. The police did reach it. The investigation was thorough. The evidence was gathered. The trial was held. The convictions were secured. Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira were held accountable for what they did. But Simon Schoten is still dead. Parts of him are still missing. His family still grieves. And somewhere in Bournemouth there is a place where the last pieces of him rest, known only to the man who put them there. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.